You know what Dr. Elkins said yesterday? Melissa said, not looking up, stirring her tea like she was performing some delicate surgery on a tea bag. She said it's textbook. Classic narcissistic displacement. That's the moment I knew. Not that my wife was slipping away. That part I'd come to terms with 2 winters ago, when she spent Christmas Eve on a women's healing retreat in Palm Springs and came back smelling like red wine and bergamot, with a yoga instructor's phone number accidentally printed on a mindfulness flyer. No, I'd made peace with the emotional drift. But this moment, this was different. This was declaration. This was her weaponizing language she didn't even understand. I looked up from my newspaper, folded it in half. I didn't say a word. Didn't twitch, didn't sigh. Just stared at the steam rising from my own cup, as if the universe had decided to spell it out for me in vapor. She thinks she's won. She thinks she is backup now. Professional backup. Melissa finally glanced up, waiting for a reaction. I gave her one, a slow nod. Makes sense, I said calmly. Therapists are good at naming things. Oh, don't be like that, she said, full lighthearted, like she'd caught me sulking after being benched in a family board game. It's not a bad thing to be called out, Vic. You don't have to take it personally. That's kind of the point. You always take things so personally. Right. Gaslight lit, gaslight burning bright. She took another sip, eyes locked on mine now, emboldened by the imaginary badge this Dr. Elkins had pinned to her chest. She says the way you withdraw emotionally when I'm upset, that it's a form of passive aggression, that it makes me feel unsafe. It's like you're controlling the room without saying a word. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was over. Not the marriage that had been crumbling behind polite dinner conversations and anniversary vacations for years. No, what was over was the game she thought she was playing. I stood up and took my mug to the sink, rinsed it out slowly. The faucet squeaked faintly. I should fix that, I thought absently. Then again, maybe not. Maybe she could call one of her empowered wellness coaches to do it. You're quiet, she said behind me, not as confident now. I'm just thinking, I said without turning. It's a lot to digest. I'm apparently the root of all your unhappiness. That's heavy stuff. Melissa sighed, exasperated now that her epiphany wasn't landing the way she imagined. Victor, I'm trying to have an honest conversation. No, you're trying to perform. And your therapist handed you the script. All right, fellas, quick break. We're shooting for 10K subscribers. If you're enjoying these gripping tales of betrayal, hit that subscribe button, and let's get back to the story. I dried the cup carefully with the checkered towel she always complained didn't match the backsplash. Then I turned and looked at her, really looked. Not the woman I married 20 years ago, or even the version of her that used to cry when we argued about money. No, this version was curated, Instagram filtered, self-branded, full of pop psychology buzzwords and weaponized vulnerability. She had no idea I already knew who Elkins was. No idea I'd seen that name before, not on some appointment card, but in a deposition from a case involving insurance fraud and therapeutic overreach. She didn't know I'd recognized it months ago when she left that glossy little card by mistake on the console table, wedged between a Lululemon receipt and a half-scribbled mantra. I deserve more. She didn't know that I had access to things most people couldn't find with 1,000 Google searches. And most importantly, she didn't know that when I looked at her tea swirling in its cup like some potion of self-delusion, I wasn't thinking about the argument. I wasn't wounded or confused or even particularly angry. I was planning. Would you mind if I go lie down for a bit? I asked, soft and mild, like the man she always thought was emotionally avoidant. All this processing. I might need a nap. Fine, she said with a shrug. But Victor, you can't keep running from the truth. This is about accountability. I paused at the doorway and turned back. You're right, I said. And sometimes accountability shows up in ways you don't expect. She didn't respond. Just went back to her tea, satisfied she delivered her TED Talk for the day. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled open the drawer of my nightstand, and removed the thin manila folder I hadn't touched in 4 months. Printed emails, court settlements, an internal ethics board memo I probably wasn't supposed to have, a photocopy of a check marked confidential malpractice settlement. She wanted therapy to validate her exit. I had no problem with that. But if she was going to start a war with a therapist as her general, she should have picked a better one. It was a Tuesday when I saw the card. Melissa had left it near the edge of the entryway table, casually buried beneath a catalog for artisan bath salts and a half-crumpled appointment reminder from her chiropractic energy realignment. I wouldn't have noticed it, except that the card was angled just so, the corner poking out like it wanted to be seen. Dr. Valerie Elkins, Ph.D., licensed trauma specialist, and feminine empowerment coach. No credentials listed. Just soft lavender script and a lotus flower logo. The kind of branding that screams enlightenment and Instagram quotes. But it was the name, Elkins, that made something twitch in the back of my brain. I'd seen it before. Not on a business card. In a redacted legal brief. I didn't mention it to Melissa. Just slipped the card into my planner that night, while she was upstairs watching a documentary about neuroplasticity in abusive households, a new favorite topic of hers. I've spent most of my life around liars. Not the dramatic kind, not swindlers or pickpockets, but white-collar professionals who bend facts with surgical precision. In my line of work, insurance litigation, credibility is a currency. And when someone's name shows up in a sealed settlement, you learn to pay attention. I started digging the next day. I didn't need passwords or shady backdoor access. Just patience. The state's professional license database was public. You just had to know how to ask it the right way. Sure enough, there she was, Valerie A. Elkins, Ph.D., licensed marriage and family therapist. License active. Status, clear, no current infractions. But 5 years ago, a single line in small gray font. Investigative inquiry concluded, settlement reached. No admission of fault. That told me everything and nothing at once. No details, no names, just legal tap dancing. So I went deeper. Through an old contact in medical claims, a guy I helped once dodge a multi-million-dollar audit, I got access to something juicier. A document I wasn't supposed to have. An ethics committee memo that had been quietly buried. Dr. Elkins had been involved in a therapy dynamic that allegedly encouraged enmeshment between therapist and client and blurred professional boundaries through off-book mentoring. Translation: she got too cozy, and someone's life got ruined. There was also a check, scanned, watermarked, confidential, written out from a liability insurer. 6 figures. No court case, no media coverage. Just silence bought with a signature. I printed every page. Didn't tell a soul. Melissa and I were still speaking civilly then. Still doing polite dinners. Still pretending things were just going through a phase. I even paid for one of her therapy sessions, a Venmo note labeled healing. But that folder? I kept it flat, pressed inside an old binder under my desk. Not because I thought I'd need it. Because I knew I might. Melissa was the type who liked narratives. She crafted them, leaned into them, wore them like armor. She'd started talking about cycles of emotional neglect and reclaiming her agency. At first I thought she was genuinely trying to process things. I even respected it. But then it turned manipulative. Cold. Performed. Like she was rehearsing someone else's lines. And I realized something chilling. She wasn't unpacking her trauma. She was replacing reality. Elkins had given her a script. A shiny, one-size-fits-all therapeutic costume to wrap around our marriage. Every new phrase, emotional labor, micro-gaslighting, holding space, felt less like self-reflection and more like ammunition. And every time she dropped those words, she believed them more than the decade of moments we'd lived together. So I waited. And now, hearing her quote Elkins over tea like a priest reciting liturgy, I knew the moment had come. The folder wasn't just a precaution anymore. It was a scalpel, and Melissa had just handed me the patient. I waited until she fell asleep. Melissa had taken to wearing a sleep mask lately, as if shutting out light could also shut out consequence. I listened to her breath settle into that slow, shallow rhythm she got after half a bottle of wine and whatever herbal supplement her latest podcast had told her to try. I watched her chest rise and fall. She looked peaceful, almost innocent. That was the cruelest illusion of all. I took the phone into my office downstairs, lights off, door half closed. The hallway was dim. The smell of her essential oil diffuser still lingered faintly, eucalyptus and fake serenity. The number I dialed wasn't written down anywhere. I'd memorized it years ago, back when I handled the litigation defense for the Professional Liability Board. At the time, it was just another file, another case, a psychologist in Sacramento who'd overprescribed trauma narratives to teenagers and ended up with 3 families in flames. One of the men in that case, Alan Forsyth, was a pit bull with a law degree. No? He ran compliance audits for the State Licensing Board. Oversight Division. Senior investigator. He picked up after 2 rings. "Victor," he said, voice like gravel and espresso. "Been a minute." "It has," I replied. "You have time for a quiet call?" "For you?" "Always. No pleasantries." I got to the point. "I've got a name. Valerie Elkins. Licensed MFT. There's a record of a settlement about 5 years ago. Not disciplinary, but flagged. Off-book mentoring. Boundary issues. She's working again. Coaching a client close to me. And I think she's doing it again." He didn't ask how I knew. Didn't ask who the client was. That's what I appreciated about Forsyth. He understood the art of the implication. "Was the settlement sealed?" he asked. "Yes. But I have a copy of the insurance payment and the ethics memo. I'm not distributing them. Just wanted you aware." "Because the pattern? It's re-emerging." There was a pause. Then the sound of fingers tapping a keyboard. "Elkins, yep. Still active. No flags. No current cases pending. She's getting more sophisticated. Now it's feminine empowerment coaching on the side. Not officially therapy, not officially billing, just rewriting people's memories 1 tea session at a time." Another pause. The tone shifted. "You want me to look into her?" "No," I said. "I just want the file reopened. On paper. The rest will handle itself." He was silent for a few seconds longer, and then he chuckled, low, dry, approving. "You always were surgical," he said. "All right. I'll log a review initiation. Won't name you. You're just a source. Consider the wheel turning. Appreciated." I hung up. That was it. No fireworks. No threats. Just the sound of the state machine beginning its slow, grinding pivot towards someone who thought she was above scrutiny. Someone who had forgotten that real professionals, the ones who don't put lotus flowers on their business cards, take ethics seriously. Someone who thought my silence made me harmless. I stood at the window for a while, watching the breeze push shadows across the lawn. Melissa had always mocked the fact that I didn't emote, that I kept things inside, that I didn't explode during arguments. She didn't understand that stillness is where the damage begins. Stillness is strategy. And tonight, I had moved. Not with rage, not with noise, but with precision. The kind that doesn't need to shout to leave scars. Melissa woke up late. It was already past 8, which for her was unusual. Normally, she liked to be up early, doing her little routines, dry brushing, lemon water, playing ambient spa music while scrolling through spiritual memes she'd later regurgitate in conversation like they were divine revelations. But that morning, no music, no lemon, just the sound of her tapping at her phone with increasing agitation, her sleep mask pushed up like a crown of wilted flowers. I watched from the hallway mirror as she padded downstairs in her robe, clutching her phone like it had betrayed her. She looked irritated. Not panicked, not yet. Just annoyed in the way people do when the Wi-Fi won't connect at their favorite brunch spot. She didn't say good morning. Just sat at the counter, fingers flying over the screen. I poured my coffee in silence, gave her a quick glance. Something wrong. She frowned. Elkins's website won't load. I took a sip, waited. I've tried it on 2 browsers. Says the server isn't responding. I was supposed to have a session at 10, but the app says her profile is temporarily suspended. What does that even mean? I let the steam from the mug fog my glasses before I answered. Could be a server update. She didn't say anything about that. Maybe it's sudden. Melissa's frown deepened. She tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Again. Same thing. Then I saw it, not fear, not yet, but a very specific kind of discomfort, the kind that comes when you realize the infrastructure holding up your illusion is made of cheap wooden staples. Her tone shifted, just slightly, like a child testing a floorboard that creaked under their foot. She never misses sessions, she murmured. Even during her vacation last month, she took a call with me from a vineyard. Must be serious then. She glanced at me. She would have told me. We've built trust. That's when I turned around, leaned gently against the kitchen counter, and met her eyes. Calm. Unmoved. Maybe it's worth getting a second opinion. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Just this little static inhale, like her throat had short-circuited. She stared, trying to decode whether I was being sarcastic. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't frowning. Just watching. And in that moment, I saw it, the flicker. She looked back down at her phone, opened the app again. Same message. Profile temporarily suspended due to administrative hold. She opened the email from the scheduling service. There it was in black and white. This provider has been paused while internal review is conducted. Please await further updates. She read it twice. Then a third time. Her thumbs hovered over the screen like they couldn't figure out what to type. Then she did the only thing she could think of. She texted me. Something's happening with Dr. Elkins. I think something's wrong. I let it sit for a few seconds. Watched the little bubble as she hovered, probably expecting a hug in digital form. Or reassurance. Or a panicked, what, to validate the sinking feeling in her gut. I replied. Might be worth getting a second opinion. No emoji. No follow-up. She didn't respond. Just stared at the screen like it had slapped her. Then she put the phone down and walked upstairs, slow and quiet. No muttering. No dramatic stomps. Just the soft hush of a woman reevaluating her footing in a house where she thought she held all the ground. The funny thing about a foundation, Melissa, you don't realize it's cracking until the walls don't answer back. And that morning, the walls were silent. It was just after 11 when her phone rang. I was in the den, pretending to read. The book was open, but I hadn't turned a page in half an hour. From the corner of my eye, I watched Melissa glance at the screen. Her face was puffy, not from crying, no. Melissa didn't cry. She seethed. And all day she'd been circling the house like a trapped cat, calling Elkins, reloading the website, opening and closing the app like maybe if she clicked fast enough, it would magically resurrect. Now, finally, the name flashed across the screen. Dr. Elkins, no caller ID. Melissa snapped upright and answered so quickly she knocked over her glass of mineral water. I didn't move. I just listened. Val? Oh, thank God I've been. Pause. Another pause. I couldn't hear the therapist's voice, but I didn't need to. I could hear the tone of silence. What do you mean, you can't meet? Melissa's voice cracked, a rare and involuntary fracture. Wait, what formal complaint? Who? She froze, stood completely still in the middle of the rug. Then, cautiously, did someone report you? Long dead air. Then, faint. I could barely catch it, but the bitterness carried. You should focus on your husband. He's vindictive. Melissa didn't say anything. I watched her hand tremble slightly, still clutching the phone. The word hit her harder than anything I'd said in months. Not controlling. Not passive-aggressive. Not distant. Vindictive. The line went dead. She didn't lower the phone. Just stood there, holding it against her cheek like she was waiting for it to speak again. Then slowly, as if her whole reality had narrowed to one fragile thread, she lowered it and turned toward me. She didn't say it, but I could feel the question radiating off her. Was it you? I kept my eyes on the book, flipped a page, let the silence do the rest. She hovered for a moment longer, the air thick between us, then left the room, slower than usual. No huffs, no snide comments, no jabs about emotional avoidance, just the soft, retreating sound of bare feet on hardwood. Upstairs, I heard the bedroom door close. Not slam, just close. And just like that, the mirror cracked. All her sessions, the comfort, the guidance, the convenient validation, had evaporated into a single, shaky voicemail. Elkins wasn't offering affirmations anymore. She was scrambling for cover. And Melissa? For the first time in this whole self-appointed journey of healing, she wasn't enlightened or centered. She was exposed. And finally, afraid. By sunrise the next day, Melissa had found her shield again, or at least, the illusion of one. She wasn't quiet anymore. Something had flipped overnight. Probably the same voice in her head that had told her to marry a man 23 years her senior because stability was sexier than chaos. That voice now whispered something different. Don't retreat. Perform. She took to her Instagram first. A story slide. Pale beige background. Curated font. Sometimes, when a woman sets boundaries, the abuser calls it sabotage. Stay grounded. Protect your peace. No names. No tags. but anyone who knew us would know the target. I wasn't the type to sabotage. I was the type to send polite thank you emails and know exactly who to CC on a disciplinary review. I took a screenshot. A few hours later, Facebook. It's chilling how systems can be manipulated by those who understand them too well. When therapy becomes a threat to control, ask yourself, who's really scared of healing? I took another screenshot. She spent the afternoon pacing the backyard on the phone with someone, probably one of her wine circle friends from her goddess empowerment seminar. Every few sentences were clipped, like they were rehearsed. I caught bits through the window. Not illegal, but definitely unethical. Weaponizing state systems. How many other women is he doing this to? That last one made me laugh, quietly. She was painting herself into a parable now, the brave heroine, speaking truth to the invisible villain. The irony, of course, being that the villain had never once raised his voice or broken a glass. Just read the fine print. But then came her mistake. She posted on a local wellness board, anonymous handle, but same writing style, same pseudo-spiritual cadence. Therapist I know is being targeted by a client's spouse, a powerful man with legal connections. They're reopening a sealed issue to destroy her. If anyone has experience fighting back against bureaucratic abuse, please reach out. The patriarchy doesn't rest. And just like that, she crossed a line. I logged into an old forum account I hadn't touched in 6 years. The username was forgettable, the IP routed clean. I visited the same local mental health board where her post was gaining soft traction, hearts, supportive comments, shared indignation. I replied, not to her post directly, but in a new thread. Subject, concerns about therapist ethics patterns emerging? I kept it simple. Objective. Cold. Does anyone have experience with a therapist whose license was quietly settled out of court for professional boundary violations? Specifically one who later marketed herself as a feminine empowerment coach after a malpractice payout. Then I attached a redacted version of the memo. The check image. The PDF with the ethics notes, cropped, watermarked, anonymized just enough to pass for leaked, but credible. I let it sit. Within 12 hours, replies. By 24, more. By 36, someone found her Yelp page. By 48, it was on fire. Comments piling in. Be careful. Serious red flags. Had a weird experience. Trust your gut. Does anyone know why she's under review? Heard something about past cases. Melissa read them all. I know this because her laptop was open at the kitchen table and her face had gone pale in that very specific way, not fear, not sadness. Exposure. Like a stage actress realizing mid-monologue that her mic is off and the crowd isn't buying it anymore. She looked at me once that evening, not with rage, not with fury, but with calculation. And that's how I knew she was starting to understand the terrain. This wasn't war in the way she imagined it. This was chess, and I'd already taken her queen. She stormed into my office like she owned gravity. Hair still damp from her shower, silk robe tied like a battle flag, and a printout in her hand that I recognized immediately, one of the forum screenshots, probably the comment about red flags and ethics violations. She was trembling, not from fear, but indignation. The kind that bubbles when someone accustomed to quiet compliance finally realizes they've lost control of the room. You're sick, she said, voice shaking. This harassment? This is what you do to women who tell the truth. I didn't look up from my desk at first. I was sorting documents for a client's deposition. Real problems, real people, real lives. Not the Instagram dramatics of a woman who thought hashtags counted as evidence. You went after my therapist, she snapped. My support system. That woman helped me heal. She coached you, I interrupted, finally raising my eyes. Big difference. Melissa threw the paper down on my desk. She was helping me process years of emotional neglect. And in return, she gave you buzzwords and a script, I said, gently brushing the page aside. And now that it's unraveling, you want someone to blame. You always do. You leaked sealed documents, Victor. Do you understand how illegal that is? Not illegal, I replied, calmly. You'd be amazed what's available through liability archives if you know where to look. No NDAs were broken. No laws touched. Just inconvenient truths, which apparently are only welcome when they're about me. She stepped back slightly, thrown off by the precision of it. She wanted rage. An outburst. A slip. Something emotional she could point to and say there. That's the abuse. But I don't give people that. I never have. Instead, I reached into the drawer to my right and pulled out a single sheet of paper. No dramatic flair. No slow slide across the desk. Just a quiet placement in front of her. She looked at it, confused at first. It was a printed email. No header. No signature. But the content was unmistakable. You need to stop trying to manipulate your narrative to make him the villain. That's not therapy. That's projection. Her eyes flicked back and forth across the line. Once. Then again slower. I don't understand, she said, voice thinner now. She wouldn't. She wrote that to you, I said. Last year. After one of your sessions. You were furious for 2 days and told me to keep my energy out of your healing process. But you never deleted the email. Just left it in your cloud archive. She stared. I smiled faintly. She should have been more careful with emails. Melissa didn't speak. Her face, so often a mask of self-assurance or moral indignation, had gone slack. No witty retort. No righteous fury. Just the slow, horrifying realization that her carefully curated tower of self-righteousness had been built on rot, and someone had just turned on the lights. Why are you doing this? She whispered finally, barely audible. Because, Melissa, I said, leaning back in my chair, you weren't the only one in this house who was paying attention. She stood there for another moment, frozen between two instincts, to lash out or to run. But she did neither. She turned and walked out of the room. Slower this time. Lighter, almost. Like her ego had lost weight. By Thursday morning, Melissa's confidence had curdled into something else. Not sorrow. Not humility. Just this brittle, nervous energy like someone watching the tide recede too far and knowing, instinctively, that a wave was coming. I didn't need to spy. The evidence unfolded in plain sight. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table again, tabs multiplying like bacteria. Psychology Today, BetterHelp, ZocDoc, even a few LinkedIn profiles of therapists she'd mocked only weeks earlier for being too clinical or not trauma-informed enough. The once smug gatekeeper of her own mental clarity was now casting nets in every direction, but nothing was biting. Unavailable, she whispered under her breath, scrolling. Out of network, not accepting new clients, waitlisted. I watched as she finally found one, a private practice 20 miles away, minimal online footprint. She clicked to schedule. The message popped up after 3 seconds. Based on intake information provided, we do not believe this is a suitable clinical match. We recommend seeking care outside this network. She stared at it like it was written in another language. Melissa had always believed therapy was her safe zone, a temple, and now she was discovering it at Bouncers. And word was she wasn't getting in. I could see the email she'd started drafting on her phone too. One to a trauma-informed hypnotherapist she'd once raved about during her inner child regression phase. Another to someone with a practice out of a converted barn in Santa Rosa. No replies. She even called someone, I assume a referral she dug up through an old acquaintance, and paced the kitchen like a defense attorney on meth. I caught phrases like, yes, I've done extensive work on myself already, and no, I wasn't directly involved in the complaint. It's just fallout from something my husband stirred up. The call ended quickly. Her voice cracked just once. Right. No worries. I understand, boundaries. She hung up, sat down, and didn't move for a long time. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Thick stock paper. Embossed envelope. From a prestigious wellness clinic 3 counties over. The kind that catered to executives, not Instagram influencers. She tore it open at the counter. Dear Ms. Carver, we appreciate your interest in our integrative care program. At this time, however, we regret to inform you that due to circumstances surrounding your prior therapeutic relationship with Dr. Valerie Elkins and ongoing administrative investigations, we are unable to accommodate your request for service. We encourage you to seek care outside the immediate professional circle to avoid potential conflicts of interest. Thank you for understanding. She read it 3 times. Her hands didn't shake, but I saw something worse. Stillness. That horrible stillness people get when their mask no longer fits and they don't know which face to wear underneath. When she finally looked at me, her eyes didn't hold contempt, or fire, or even blame. Just this fragile, stammering question behind them. How is this possible? She didn't know the answer. But I did. She had mistaken my silence for detachment, my calm for passivity, my distance for indifference. But what she failed to grasp, what her therapist never warned her about, is that men like me don't need to shout to move mountains. We just need time and proximity. In a city like ours, the professional circle isn't a circle. It's a loop. And now she was walking it alone. She lit candles. That's how I knew it wasn't an apology. Melissa never apologized. But when she wanted to reframe, to reset the narrative, she leaned into aesthetics like a director staging a comeback scene. Soft jazz in the background. Her favorite stemless wine glasses. A sprig of rosemary on the cloth napkin she only used when playing domestic goddess. It wasn't peace she was offering, it was theater. I thought we could talk, she said, setting the wine down with that practiced, careful calm. It's been a lot. For both of us. I nodded. Said nothing. Sat across from her at the small table in the sunroom. The same table where we'd once planned a vacation to Lisbon and later where she told me, with zero irony, that she was too evolved for travel that involved passports. I've been thinking about everything, she said, chin tilted just enough to suggest vulnerability without surrender. And I realize, maybe we both stopped listening. Maybe we both contributed to the disconnection. I want us to find a better way to relate, to move forward with more honesty. She sipped her wine and gave me that look, the one that pretends to be open, but is actually a probe. She was trying to see if I'd softened, if I'd begun to regret what I'd put in motion, if the cold had worn off. It hadn't. I set my fork down gently, reached into my jacket pocket, and placed the folded paper on the table. She blinked at it, then unfolded it, slowly. Her smile fell the moment her eyes hit the letterhead. Notice of post-nuptial contract review, preliminary findings, third-party influence, narrative manipulation, coercive therapeutic framing. She read it twice. Her lips parted, but no words came. Then, finally, what is this? A request for review, I said, tone neutral. Through counsel, we're reevaluating certain clauses. Your decision to rely on Dr. Elkins, who, as you now know, was under ethical scrutiny, may have compromised parts of our agreement, specifically those connected to mutual consent and shared marital intent. She stared at me like I'd just spoken Latin. I thought this was a conversation, she said. I'm trying to reconnect, to rebuild. No, I said calmly. You're trying to reset the chessboard, but the pieces have already moved. You're turning our marriage into litigation? Her voice was rising, indignant again, the old confidence attempting to reboot. No, I said. You turned our marriage into a performance piece about trauma and blame. I'm just reviewing the script. Legally. Her jaw clenched. You can't weaponize the contract just because you didn't like what I said in therapy. I'm not. I'm examining the influence of an unlicensed party who encouraged you to distort events, escalate conflict, and dismantle good faith. That's not therapy, Melissa. She opened her mouth to reply and stopped. This isn't therapy, I added. This is strategy. Silence. Even the jazz track had gone quiet, paused on a buffering note. She didn't touch her wine again, just sat there, hollowed out by the realization that the man she thought was emotionally muted had simply been biding time. Watching, learning, and now moving. She had tried to build a case with feelings and buzzwords. I had responded with ink, clause, and contract. And now the narrative, her narrative, wasn't just broken. It was being rewritten. The drive took 47 minutes. I know because I tracked her phone location from my office, not out of paranoia, but completion. Melissa was nothing if not predictable when cornered. She'd found a therapist 2 counties over with a sterling reputation, minimal digital footprint, and, crucially, no listed ties to Elkins or anyone in the local circle. She thought distance equaled safety. She thought new zip codes meant clean slates. Her GPS said she'd arrived at 10:56 a.m. The practice was nestled in one of those tasteful suburban complexes, faux brick facades, trimmed hedges, a parking lot half full of Teslas and leased Lexuses. The kind of place where healing costs $250 an hour and comes with cucumber water in the lobby. She walked in wearing what I imagine was her last mask, calm, poised, rehearsed. A fresh notebook tucked into her bag, questions ready. She probably even prepared a little monologue about feeling silenced and finding truth again. It took less than 5 minutes. She gave her name. The front desk clerk, a woman in her early 30s with a serene voice and clipboard efficiency, smiled politely. Then something changed. A pause. A glance at the screen. A subtle stiffening of posture. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "We won't be moving forward with your intake." Melissa blinked. "I don't understand. I confirmed last night." "Yes, and I'm truly sorry," the clerk replied, lowering her voice. "But your name has been flagged in our referral system. We're not permitted to disclose the specifics, but we have to honor professional boundaries." Flagged. She stood there, stunned. Not arguing. Just trying to process a word that didn't belong to her world. Flagged was for men on no-fly lists or corrupt politicians. Not for Melissa Carver, feminist rebirth in progress, speaker of truths. She left the building slowly, steps uneven. No dramatic exit. No one yelling. Just the sound of a door that would not open. The sky was overcast. Traffic light. And on the way back, somewhere near the county line, she stopped at an intersection. And there it was. The billboard. Subtle, no picture. No neon colors. Just a crisp white background, a single serif font, and a short phrase. Litigation consulting, complex problems. Quiet solutions. My firm's name sat underneath in clean black lettering. She stared at it, I'm told. For a long time. Her car idled. A horn honked behind her. She didn't move. She understood. This wasn't just about therapy anymore. This wasn't about her reclaiming something. It was about a man she thought she'd disarmed. The man who made her feel invisible in arguments, whose silence she used to interpret as weakness. He wasn't silent. He was surgical. She came home that night, didn't say a word. Walked past me in the foyer without even meeting my eyes. Upstairs, the door closed quietly. Not slammed. Not locked. Just closed. Like every other door she'd tried to open. No therapist. No allies. No story left to bend. Just the long, echoing consequence of a narrative she built on borrowed mantras and broken facts. The final appointment wasn't just canceled. It had never belonged to her in the first place.
It started with a bet. Ben, our 14-year-old son, had been bragging about his basketball team, convinced he had inherited my athletic genes. I'm no pro, but I played a decent game back in high school. We were sitting at the dinner table, just the three of us, like always, when Rachel, my wife, made a snide comment. Maybe he got it from someone else in the family, she said with a smirk that didn't quite reach her eyes. I brushed it off. Rachel had been making these weird, half-joking comments for a while now. I figured it was just her being sarcastic, maybe annoyed after a long day at work. She'd gotten harsher over the years, more distant, but I chalked it up to us being in a rut. I never thought it was anything more. Ben, completely oblivious to the tension, took the joke in stride. "Wanna bet, Dad? Let's do one of those DNA kits and see how much of a super athlete you pass down to me." He was grinning, but something about Rachel's silence was unsettling. She just stared at her plate, her fork moving food around like she wasn't even in the same room. I laughed, mostly to shake off the weird vibe. "Alright, challenge accepted," I said, not thinking much of it. It was supposed to be a joke. Just a harmless bet between a father and son. I wish I had known then how much damage one stupid test could cause. We ordered the kit that night. Rachel didn't say much about it, barely looked up from her phone when Ben and I were filling out the forms online. A couple of weeks later, the results came in. Ben couldn't wait to tear into the email. He called me over to the computer, shouting, "Dad, check this out." But when I looked at the results, I didn't see anything about basketball or athletic prowess. What I did see made my stomach drop. There was a section for paternal matches, and next to it, none detected. I blinked. Stared harder. Refreshed the page like maybe I hadn't read it right. But there it was, clear as day. I wasn't Ben's biological father. I don't remember what I said in that moment. Probably something dumb like, "Huh, that's weird." I felt a hollow pit open up inside me, but I couldn't react in front of him. Not like that. Ben was still babbling on about some ancestor from Ireland, clueless to the grenade that had just gone off in my chest. Rachel. I had to talk to Rachel. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding in my ears. She was at the sink, rinsing a glass, her back to me. For a second, I just stood there, watching her like she was a stranger in our own home. My mind was racing. Was this a mistake? Could the test be wrong? But deep down, I already knew the answer. Rachel, I said, my voice low but steady, we need to talk. She didn't turn around. What about? Her tone was clipped, like she was expecting something. I knew she was. She must have seen this coming. I took a breath, my hands gripping the edge of the counter. The DNA test. It says Ben, isn't mine. The silence that followed was suffocating. For a moment, she didn't move. Didn't speak. Then, slowly, she set the glass down and turned to face me. Her expression wasn't what I expected. There was no shock, no denial, no panic. She just looked tired. Like she'd been waiting for this day to come, and now that it had, she couldn't be bothered to put up a fight. Yeah, she said, crossing her arms. He's not. My whole body went cold. Just like that. No explanation, no apology. She said it like she was confirming what time we'd leave for a movie. And in that moment, I felt something snap inside me. What do you mean, he's not? I hissed, barely holding it together. Who is? Rachel tilted her head, almost like she was amused by my reaction. Does it even matter, she said, her voice laced with a strange kind of arrogance. You've been his father this whole time. Why does biology suddenly change that? I stared at her, my mind reeling. How could she be so casual? This wasn't a minor thing, some random detail we could brush aside. This was our son. The boy I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for. And now, it was like none of that mattered to her. Who is his father? I repeated, every word dripping with a fury I didn't even know I was capable of. Rachel's eyes darkened. For a second, I thought she might actually apologize. Tell me she'd made a mistake and was sorry for lying all these years. But instead, she smiled, a cold, bitter smile that made my skin crawl. You don't want to know, she said softly. Trust me. And right then, standing in that kitchen, I realized something. Whatever I thought I knew about my wife, about our marriage, about my life, it was about to unravel in ways I couldn't even begin to imagine. That smile, the one Rachel gave me in the kitchen, it gnawed at me. Her words lingered, you don't want to know. But I did. How could she possibly think I wouldn't want to know the truth about the boy I had raised as my own? After she dropped that bombshell, she just walked away, like we were done. Like she could brush off 14 years of lies and head to bed without a second thought. I stood there, stunned, watching her climb the stairs as if we hadn't just ripped the foundation of our lives apart. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed downstairs on the couch, staring at the ceiling, going over everything in my head. The way she dismissed it all, Ben, the affair, our entire marriage, it was too easy for her. Too cold. It was like the truth had been sitting just beneath the surface, waiting to be exposed, and now that it was out, she didn't care. By morning, I knew one thing for certain, I needed answers. When Rachel finally came downstairs the next day, she acted like nothing had happened. She grabbed her coffee, scrolling through her phone, and barely glanced at me. It was infuriating. I wanted to scream at her, but I knew I had to keep calm. I needed to get the truth out of her, one way or another. Rachel, I said quietly, my voice betraying none of the storm inside me. She didn't look up. Who is Ben's father? She took a long sip of her coffee, then set it down on the counter with deliberate slowness. I told you, she said, not meeting my eyes, you don't want to know. That was it. I snapped. I grabbed her wrist, pulling her phone out of her hand and slamming it onto the counter. Her eyes flashed with anger, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I deserve to know, I growled. Stop pretending like this doesn't matter. Tell me the truth. Rachel stared at me, and for the first time, I saw something crack behind her eyes, fear. But it was fleeting, quickly replaced by that same cold, detached expression she had worn last night. You want the truth? She asked, her voice low. She stepped closer, so close I could feel her breath on my face. Fine. You're right. Ben isn't yours. He's from an affair I had. A long time ago. Before we got married. I felt my heart thud in my chest, hard and fast. Who was it? Was it someone I know? A random guy? Her eyes flicked to the side, and in that moment, I saw it. The hesitation. The doubt. She was trying to decide if she should say more. It was someone close, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone, very close. A sickening thought crept into my mind, but I shoved it aside. No. It couldn't be. Who, Rachel? I demanded, my patience long gone. Who the hell was it? And then, with no remorse, no shame, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, it was Chris. I froze. Chris. Her stepbrother. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't speak, couldn't even breathe. I just stood there, my world shattering piece by piece. Chris. The guy I'd shared beers with at family gatherings. The man who had stood next to me at our wedding, laughing and joking as if we were the best of friends. Her stepbrother. Rachel didn't flinch. She didn't look guilty, didn't show a single ounce of regret. She just stared at me, waiting for my reaction like she was curious to see how far she could push me before I broke. You slept with your stepbrother. I barely managed to choke out the words. And he's Ben's father. She shrugged, as if it were the most casual thing in the world. We were young. It was stupid. But yeah, he's Ben's father. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was grotesque. It wasn't just that she had cheated, it was with someone from her own family, someone who had been woven into the fabric of our lives for years. I felt like I was suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. Does Ben know? I asked, my voice shaking. Does he know who his real father is? No, she said, as if that somehow made it better. He doesn't know. And he doesn't need to. You've been his father in every way that matters. I laughed then, but it was bitter, broken. You don't get it, do you? This isn't something you can just bury, Rachel. You've been lying to me for 14 years. And what about Chris? Does he know? Rachel's face darkened. No. He doesn't know. And you're not going to tell him. It took everything in me not to lose it right then and there. You want me to keep this secret? After everything? She stepped forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You don't understand what you're doing here. This isn't just about you. If you tell Chris, if you tell Ben, this whole family is going to fall apart. Do you really want that? For Ben to grow up knowing his father is his uncle? To lose everything we've built? There it was. The manipulation. The twisted logic. She was trying to make me believe that the lie was better than the truth. That keeping this secret was somehow protecting Ben, protecting us. But it wasn't. It was destroying everything. I looked at her, really looked at her, and realized something. I didn't recognize the woman standing in front of me. This wasn't the person I had married, the mother of my child. This was someone else entirely. Someone I didn't know, and maybe never had. And I was starting to think I never would. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The sun had started its descent, casting long shadows across the road, but I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to be anywhere but there, away from Rachel, away from the house that suddenly felt like a prison of lies. My phone buzzed a few times in my pocket. I knew it was Rachel. Maybe she thought I'd calm down, come back, and just accept it. That I'd shove everything under the rug for the sake of keeping the peace. But there was no peace left. Not now. Not after what she'd done. Eventually, I found myself parked in an old lot near the high school where Ben played basketball. It was empty, except for a couple of kids skating around the far side of the court. I watched them, my mind drifting, trying to focus on something simple. Something normal. But normal was gone. The test had burned a hole in my world, and now every corner of my mind was stained with doubt. Ben wasn't mine. Chris was his father. My son wasn't really my son. But did that change anything about him? About who he was to me? That's the question Rachel had cornered me with, and the worst part was, I didn't have a clear answer. All I knew was that this secret, this dark, festering lie, had changed everything else. Our family, our marriage, everything we built was a facade, and now I was standing at the edge of it, trying to figure out if I could still hold on. But what Rachel didn't get was that this wasn't just about Ben. It was about trust, about the fact that I had spent 14 years of my life in a house built on lies. How could I ever look at her the same again? How could I even look at Ben the same again without this truth hanging between us like a noose? Suddenly, my phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. But it wasn't Rachel. It was Ben. "Dad, where are you? Mom said you left. Did I do something?" I felt my throat tighten. He didn't know. He had no idea what was happening beneath the surface. How could he? I was still his father in his eyes, the man who taught him how to throw a football, who showed up to every game, every school event. The man who promised him, silently, in 1,000 little ways, that I would always be there for him. I wanted to respond, but I didn't know what to say. What was I supposed to tell him? That I'd just found out everything he believed about his life was a lie. That his real father was a man we both knew, someone we saw at family barbecues and birthdays. My hands shook as I typed out a reply, "I'm fine. Just needed some air. I'll be home soon." I hit send and immediately hated myself. Home. What did that even mean anymore? I looked at my hands gripping the steering wheel. I felt like I was living in two separate realities. There was the one where Ben was my son, where we were just a normal family with normal problems. And then there was this ugly, twisted world where nothing made sense anymore. I had to face it. I had to confront it. When I finally pulled back into the driveway, the house looked the same. Nothing had changed, but everything felt different. The lights were on, and I could see Ben's shadow moving past the living room window. Rachel was probably upstairs, waiting for me to come back, waiting to continue this sick game of pretending everything could just go back to how it was. I stepped inside, the air heavy with the smell of dinner. Ben was on the couch, scrolling through his phone. When he saw me, his face brightened in that innocent, familiar way that nearly broke me right there. "Hey, Dad. You good? Mom said you were acting weird earlier." I forced a smile, though it felt like it was shattering my face. "Yeah, just had to clear my head for a bit." He nodded, not pressing further. Just a kid, clueless to the hurricane swirling in the other half of his life. I envied him. He went back to his phone, completely unaware of the ticking time bomb sitting in the same room with him. But I couldn't look at him for long. Every second that passed felt like a reminder of the secret I now carried, this twisted weight of knowing he wasn't mine. But he was mine, wasn't he? He had to be. I was the one who had been there for everything, not Chris. Me. And yet. I heard Rachel's footsteps on the stairs before I saw her. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes locking onto mine, and I could see it, she knew this wasn't over. There was no pretending anymore. Her calm, cold demeanor from earlier was gone, replaced by something more raw, more calculating. "Ben," Rachel said softly, "why don't you head upstairs? I need to talk to your father." Ben glanced up at her, a little confused, but shrugged and made his way to his room. He didn't sense the tension between us. Why would he? He thought everything was normal. Once he was out of earshot, Rachel crossed her arms, leaning against the doorway. "You're back," she said, her voice neutral but with an edge of anticipation. "I was wondering how long you'd stay out there." I stared at her, taking in every detail. The way she still held herself together, even after everything. Like she was waiting for me to break first. I wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. "Rachel," I began, keeping my voice low, "this can't go on. We can't keep pretending this is going to fix itself. I can't just act like this doesn't change anything." She took a breath, crossing the room slowly. "It doesn't have to change everything. Ben doesn't know. We can protect him from this. We can protect all of us." "You really think that?" I asked, shaking my head. "You really think we can keep lying to him? To Chris? To everyone? How long do you think this will stay buried?" "Lies don't just go away, Rachel. They fester. And this one's been festering for 14 years. Her face tightened. "Ben doesn't need the truth. Not like this. He doesn't deserve to have his life ripped apart because of something that happened before he was even born. You're his father, not Chris. You." The way she said it, like she was handing me a life raft, made me sick. But maybe that was the cruelest part of all, there was truth in it. I was Ben's father in every way that mattered. I had to believe that. But Rachel's betrayal, her lies, had shattered everything else. "I can't live like this, Rachel," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't live with this hanging over us, over me. You've made me complicit in your lies. You've dragged me into this, and I don't know if I can ever get out." She stepped closer, her voice softening in that manipulative way she'd always used when she wanted to win. "You don't have to get out, though. We can keep things as they are. Just let it go. For Ben. For us." I stared at her, my heart racing, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. Could I really do that? Could I shove everything aside for Ben's sake? Keep this secret until it consumed me whole? I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, up the stairs, leaving her standing there in the dim kitchen light. She could wait for my answer all night, but I didn't have one. Not yet. The night didn't feel real. Nothing did. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Rachel beside me, her breathing steady. Calm. Like she wasn't sitting on top of this mountain of secrets she'd built with her own hands. I could feel the weight of her presence, a hollow, suffocating pressure that made it impossible to close my eyes. I wondered how she could sleep so easily. Maybe it was because she'd been living with this lie for years, long enough that the guilt had faded into nothing, or maybe never existed at all. How had she convinced herself that what she did wasn't wrong? That it didn't matter? I couldn't do it. I couldn't shut off my mind like that. Rachel's voice, her cold, twisted logic, echoed in my head. You're Ben's father. That doesn't change just because of biology. Don't destroy everything. But hadn't she already destroyed everything? I couldn't breathe. I got up, careful not to wake her, and went to Ben's room. His door was cracked open just enough for me to see him lying there, sprawled out in a messy tangle of sheets, snoring lightly. His basketball jersey was hanging on the chair by his desk. The poster of LeBron James was taped above his bed, the corners frayed from years of being there. All the signs of a normal life. His normal life. He looked peaceful. Innocent. completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside his door. He had no idea that his world was hanging by a thread, and that his parents, his father, were standing at the edge, trying to figure out whether to pull him down with us or let him float, blissfully ignorant. I leaned against the doorframe, my chest tight. Rachel had said she didn't want to hurt him. She didn't want to ruin him. But the truth was already ruining me. Every second that passed, the weight of what I knew was crushing me. I was supposed to protect him, right? That's what fathers do. But how was I supposed to protect him from the truth when it was burning a hole through my own heart? I walked into his room quietly, sitting down in the chair next to his bed. He didn't stir, not even when I reached out and gently brushed his hair back from his forehead. My mind was racing. If I told him the truth, what would that do to him? Could he even handle it? Or would it break him the way it was breaking me? I tried to imagine what his face would look like when I told him. How his eyes would change, how the boy I knew would disappear behind this terrible knowledge, this irreversible truth. And then I imagined him hating me for not telling him. For keeping him in the dark. For lying, just like Rachel had lied. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. The silence in the room was so loud, pressing down on me like a vice. I couldn't stay in the house any longer. It was like the walls were closing in, suffocating me with every breath. Without thinking, I stood up, grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter, and walked out the door. The moment I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me like a slap to the face, but at least it was real. At least it cut through the fog in my head. I drove. Fast. No direction, no destination. Just moving, as if speed alone could outrun the truth. My mind kept going back to Rachel, to Chris, to the lie that had woven itself so deeply into my life that I wasn't sure where the truth began anymore. Rachel had made her decision a long time ago. She'd chosen lies over honesty, chosen to keep me and Ben in the dark. But now, it was my choice. My decision to make. And I had no idea what the right answer was. I found myself pulling up to a bar on the edge of town. It was quiet, dimly lit, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. I needed that. I needed to sit, drink, and not think for a while. Just for a moment, I wanted to be numb. I walked in, sat at the bar, and ordered whiskey, neat. The bartender poured without a word, and I downed it in one swallow. The burn felt good. It cleared my head, if only for a few seconds. As I ordered another, a familiar voice cut through the dull hum of the bar. Dan. Is that you? I looked up and saw Chris, sitting a few stools away, staring at me with surprise. Of all the people in the world, why him? Of course. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. I forced a smile, even though everything inside me was screaming. Hey, Chris. He grinned, getting up to sit next to me. Didn't expect to see you here, man. What brings you out so late? His voice, his casual demeanor, made my skin crawl. He had no idea. He didn't know that I was sitting there with the knowledge that he was Ben's biological father. The man I had joked with at barbecues, who had watched me raise his son without a single clue. What's going on with you, man? Chris asked, nudging me with his elbow like we were old pals. I looked at him, this man who was now more connected to my life than I ever wanted him to be, and felt a surge of anger rising in my chest. It took everything in me not to punch him right there. Not that it was his fault. He didn't know. But still. You wouldn't believe me if I told you, I muttered, staring into my glass. Chris laughed. Try me. For a moment, I almost did. I almost let it all spill out, the affair, the test, the sick truth that connected us in ways neither of us had ever expected. But I stopped myself. Barely. Just, family stuff, I finally said, clenching my jaw. He nodded, sipping his beer. Yeah, I hear that. Family's complicated. Rachel driving you crazy again? I flinched at her name, gripping my glass tighter. Something like that. Chris smirked, shaking his head. She's a handful, man. Always has been. I couldn't take it. The casual way he talked about her, about everything, while I was drowning in the knowledge of what had happened between them. The whiskey wasn't enough to dull the edges of my rage. Chris, I said, my voice suddenly tight, do you ever regret anything? You know, from back in the day. He raised an eyebrow, clearly confused by the shift in conversation. Regret? What do you mean? I stared at him, wondering if he even had a clue. Or if Rachel had buried this lie so deep that even he had forgotten what they'd done. What they'd created together. You and Rachel, I said slowly, the words barely making it out. Did you ever, you know? He looked at me, his face changing, a flicker of something, surprise. Recognition. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a laugh. Man, that was a long time ago. We were kids. It was nothing. Nothing. That's what he thought it was. A fling. A mistake. He had no idea that it had resulted in a life. In Ben. I clenched my fists under the bar, trying to hold myself together. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him that what he thought was nothing had blown up my entire life. But instead, I just nodded, my jaw tight. Yeah. Nothing. Because, at the end of the day, I knew what had to happen next. The next morning felt like it had no beginning. I barely remembered stumbling back into the house in the dead of night, the whiskey's burn still lingering on my tongue. I had driven home on autopilot, Chris's casual dismissal of his past with Rachel ringing in my ears. Nothing. That's what he called it. The affair, the lies, the fact that he had a son he didn't even know about. All of it, nothing. I couldn't shake the feeling that had settled deep in my bones, a mix of betrayal and fury. But somewhere, beneath the anger, a dull acceptance had started to take root. I had to face the fact that I was the only one who had the power to change what happened next. Chris was oblivious. Rachel, manipulative as she was, had already made her decision years ago. Ben. Ben was still just a kid, caught in the middle of something he didn't deserve. And me? I was the one standing on the edge, forced to decide whether to jump into the truth or let it stay buried. For Ben's sake. For my sake. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker as it sputtered out a slow drip. The sun had just started to rise, casting a soft glow through the window. The house was silent, save for the quiet hum of the fridge. It felt like a moment suspended in time, where the world hadn't yet woken up to the chaos that lay just beneath the surface. Rachel appeared behind me, her presence like a shadow I couldn't shake. I didn't turn to face her, but I knew she was watching me, trying to gauge where my mind was at after the night before. The tension between us was thick, electric, but neither of us said a word. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. You stayed out late. Her voice was calm. Almost too calm. Like she had already decided how this was going to go, and now she just needed me to fall in line. I poured the coffee, taking a slow sip before I answered. Yeah. Needed to think. Rachel took a step closer, her arms crossed. And? Have you thought about it? About what we talked about? I could hear the tension in her voice, the thin layer of fear she was trying to hide. She was still banking on the hope that I would keep her secret. That I would lie for her. I turned to face her, my eyes searching her face for any sign of the woman I once loved. The mother of my son. But all I saw was someone I barely recognized, someone who had been playing a role for so long that she'd convinced herself it was real. I've thought about it, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Rachel's eyes flickered with something, hope, but she stayed silent, waiting for me to continue. I love Ben, I started, each word heavy with meaning. More than anything. He's my son. And nothing, no DNA test, no secret, can change that. She exhaled, a breath she'd clearly been holding. Relief washed over her face, but I wasn't finished. But, I said, and her relief froze, I can't live like this, Rachel. I can't keep lying. Not to Ben. Not to Chris. Not to myself. Her face hardened immediately. So you're going to tell them? You're going to ruin everything, just because you can't handle the truth. I shook my head, feeling an odd sense of calm settle over me. No, Rachel. You ruined everything. You made this choice. You're the one who lied for years, who kept this from all of us. And now you expect me to just play along. Pretend it's okay. I can't do that. Her eyes darkened, and I could see the mask starting to crack. You're going to blow up our family, she said, her voice low and dangerous. You're going to destroy Ben's life because you can't swallow your pride. No, I said firmly. I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this for him. He deserves the truth, even if it's ugly. He deserves to know who he is, where he comes from. Rachel stepped closer, her voice rising with every word. You're going to tell him his father is his uncle. That his entire life has been a lie. Do you really think that's better? You're going to ruin him, Dan. And for what? So you can feel better about yourself? I stood my ground, feeling the weight of my decision pressing down on me, but somehow it felt lighter than the lies. He deserves a chance to decide for himself. Not to live in this web of secrets you've spun. Her eyes blazed with anger. If you tell him, he'll never look at you the same way again. You'll lose him. The words hit like a punch to the gut. But I knew she was wrong. Maybe Ben would hate me for a while. Maybe he wouldn't understand why I was telling him the truth. But in the long run, I believed he'd respect me for it. Because lies like this, they rot. They eat away at everything, slowly, until there's nothing left. I'll take that chance, I said, my voice resolute. Because the alternative is worse. Rachel stared at me for a long moment, her face contorted with rage, frustration, and maybe, just maybe, a flicker of fear. But she didn't say anything else. She just turned and walked away, retreating upstairs, leaving me standing alone in the kitchen with the weight of my decision. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let this lie fester any longer. Not for Rachel's sake. Not even for my own. Ben deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. And Chris, he had a right to know, too. Later that day, I called Chris and asked him to meet me. No bar this time. I told him to come over to the house. He sounded confused, but agreed. It didn't take long for him to arrive, pulling up in his beat-up truck like he always did, smiling that same easygoing smile I'd seen 100 times. But this time was different. This time, the smile felt like a knife twisting in my gut. We sat on the porch, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. I didn't know how to start. How do you even begin to tell someone that their whole life is a lie? That the child they've known as their nephew is actually their son? Chris was halfway through a sentence about work when I interrupted him, my voice heavy. Chris, there's something I need to tell you. And, it's not going to be easy to hear. He looked at me, frowning, the humor in his eyes fading. What's going on, man? You're scaring me. I took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. It's about Ben, I said, my voice trembling just slightly. There's something you need to know. Something Rachel's been hiding from both of us. Chris's brow furrowed, confusion settling in. Ben. What about him? The words felt thick in my throat, like they didn't want to come out. But I forced them. Ben, he's not my son. Not biologically. Chris blinked, clearly not understanding. What do you mean? Of course he's your son. I've known him his whole life. No, I said, cutting him off. He's not. Rachel, she had an affair. Before we got married. With you, Chris. Ben is your son. The world seemed to stop. Chris stared at me, his mouth slightly open, like he was waiting for the punchline to a joke that wasn't coming. He shook his head slowly. What? No. That's not possible. But it was. And as I laid it all out for him, the DNA test, Rachel's confession, the years of lies, I watched the realization dawn on his face. His expression shifted from disbelief to horror, then to something I hadn't expected, guilt. He stood up suddenly, pacing the porch, running his hands through his hair. I didn't know, man. I swear to God, I didn't know. I believed him. I could see it in his eyes. He had been in the dark, just like me. But now, there was no more darkness. Just the raw, exposed truth. When Chris finally stopped pacing, he turned to me, his voice broken. What do we do? What do we tell him? I looked at him, this man who had unknowingly shared in the greatest lie of my life, and felt something strange settle over me. A calmness. A clarity. We tell him the truth, I said simply. He deserves that much. The next few hours would be the hardest of my life. But as Ben sat across from me and Chris, his face pale and confused, I knew that this was the beginning of something new. Something painful, yes, but honest. Rachel was wrong. The truth didn't have to destroy us. Maybe, just maybe, it could set us free. In the silence that followed, Ben stared at the floor, his hands trembling in his lap. I braced myself for the worst, tears, anger, rejection. But instead, he looked up, eyes filled with hurt but also something else. Something I hadn't expected. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. And in that moment, I realized something. Maybe the lie had hurt, but it wasn't the end. We weren't broken beyond repair. We were still a family. A different family than I thought, but a family all the same. I'm sorry, I whispered, my throat tight. I should have. Ben nodded slowly, processing everything, but he didn't push me away. Instead, he stood up, walked over, and hugged me. And in that embrace, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Hope. The truth didn't destroy us. It just changed everything. And maybe, in the end, that was enough.
I didn't clap. Everyone else did, parents, teachers, that one drunk uncle in the fifth row who'd clearly pre-gamed in the parking lot. But not me. I sat there, back row, center aisle, hands gripping the rolled-up graduation program like it was a tourniquet keeping something darker from spilling out. The applause swelled, echoed off the gymnasium rafters, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my daughter beamed. She was stunning. Cap tilted slightly, tassel hanging to the side, confidence in every gesture. She didn't look for me. She looked toward the front row, where Karen sat with him. Tyler. New boyfriend. CEO. Black Porsche, loud laugh, handshake for everyone. A man whose sunglasses cost more than my suit. He looked like the goddamn cover of a lifestyle magazine. Teeth bleached, wrists heavy with watches, the kind of man who speaks in buzzwords and has never ironed a shirt himself. And yet, there he was, sitting next to my ex-wife like he belonged, as if he had paid the tuition, as if the girl on that stage had always called him dad. A week earlier, over dinner at some overpriced farm-to-table restaurant Karen insisted on, our daughter had looked up from her phone just long enough to say it. Mom's boyfriend is a CEO. What are you again? Just dad? Just dad. She laughed. Karen smirked over her wine like she'd won. Tyler, of course, leaned back in his chair like the compliment was his birthright. I just nodded, swirled the ice in my glass, said nothing, because what could I say? That I'd paid every tuition bill in full and on time? That I skipped a raise 3 years ago just to keep the schedule flexible so I could make it to every recital, even when no one invited me anymore? That I had built my own business from scratch, slow, steady, private, without the need to shout about it over Wagyu sliders? They weren't listening. They hadn't been for a while. Listen, quick break. We set a goal to hit 10K subscribers. So tap subscribe if you're liking these wild stories of betrayal. Now let's get back to the madness. I remember the moment it shifted. 2 years ago, exactly, I sat alone in my office flipping through a box of her old drawings. One of them had "To Daddy, Love You" written in backward letters, and I realized something painful. I hadn't been replaced. I'd been erased. Not with malice. With apathy. With shiny distractions and borrowed prestige. With Karen's curated Instagram captions about choosing joy and manifesting greatness next to pictures of her clinking champagne flutes with Tyler in Santorini. That night, I wrote 2 emails. One to my lawyer about restructuring the trust in case anything happened to me. The other to the head of the school's foundation board. No subject line, just a sentence. I'd like to make a contribution to the arts program, anonymously, for now. That was the first domino. No one knew, not even my accountant at first, just how deep I was planning to go. And I didn't rush it. Quiet moves. Long game. No spotlight. I wasn't looking for applause. I was building something she couldn't ignore, not because it was loud, but because it would outlast every flashy caption and lease sports car. And now, sitting in that plastic folding chair, legs stiff, hands aching around the paper in my fist, I watched them, Karen, Tyler, the daughter I once read bedtime stories to, laughing like the world already belonged to them. They thought they broke me. They didn't see the foundation plaque in the lobby, still covered by a velvet curtain per our agreement. They didn't know I owned the naming rights to the refurbished theater wing, or that I'd written the bylaws on exactly when and how that curtain comes down. I never wanted to be the man who needed revenge. But damn if legacy doesn't taste better when it's served cold. They didn't slam the door shut on me. That would have at least made a sound. Something final. Something real. Instead, they left it ajar, just enough to humiliate me every time I peeked in. A slow fade, like old ink on a birthday card. One day, I was her father. The next, I was a monthly wire transfer and a courtesy copy on the school email list. The first sign came when I showed up to her spring recital and found my name missing from the program. Not misspelled, missing. Karen's name was there. Tyler's too, listed as a supporting patron. I stared at the sheet like it owed me something. I knew I'd written the $2,800 check that funded the new music stands. I had the receipt, but it wasn't about the money. It was about being airbrushed out of the frame so cleanly, so confidently, you almost doubted you'd ever been in it to begin with. My daughter hugged Tyler afterward. Called him T. I'd never gotten a nickname. Not once. She turned to me, said thanks for coming, like I was a co-worker who swung by after work. A week later, I heard through a mutual friend that she didn't include me in her senior yearbook dedication. It was just easier that way, Karen had explained. Alan's harmless. He's just boring now. That one stuck with me. Not the insult. God knows Karen's had sharper, but the smugness behind it. Harmless. Like I was a Labrador. Loyal, dumb, and easily ignored. Meanwhile, Tyler was showing up in every family photo like a pop-up ad you couldn't close. Arms draped over shoulders that weren't his, smiling like a man who thinks he invented success. And the worst part? He started calling her my girl. At first in captions, then in front of me. She's my girl, he'd say when she won an award or performed on stage. And no one corrected him. I kept showing up anyway. I sat in the back at every play, every speech competition. I clapped when she walked on stage, even when I had to buy a separate ticket because Karen claimed there weren't enough passes this time. I paid every tuition invoice the second it hit my inbox. Never late. Never questioned. Some thought I was desperate. That I didn't know I was being sidelined. That I was clinging to some outdated notion of fatherhood like a man holding a rotary phone in an iPhone world. I wasn't clinging. I was collecting. Every missed mention. Every sidelong glance. Every time Tyler touched my daughter's shoulder like she was his. I was cataloging erasure in real time. Not because I needed their validation, but because I needed clarity. Their game was noise. Mine was precision. And while Karen Instagrammed her sunset wine tastings and Tyler posted #GirlboSprout with my daughter's achievements, I invested in silence. In stage curtains and soundproof practice rooms, and oil paint drying on new canvases. I didn't just write checks. I signed contracts. Ones they hadn't read yet. I wasn't there to be seen. I was there to witness. To measure the depth of their blindness. And when the lights came on, when the curtain rose one final time, I wanted every second of their comfort to make the fall hurt worse. Because men like me aren't mourned when we're pushed aside. But we are remembered when the echo finally hits. The first time I walked into the headmaster's office, he thought I was lost. Parent meetings next door, he'd said, gesturing to the guidance wing like I couldn't possibly belong in the room with mahogany shelves and donor portfolios. I just nodded and sat down. Mr. Reed, I said quietly, I'm not here about grades. I'm here about funding. He straightened up like I'd dropped a grenade on the carpet. I laid out my plan with the kind of calm I'd perfected after years in supply chain logistics, quiet, deliberate, unshakable. I wasn't here for a plaque. I wasn't here for gala invitations. I didn't want my name in the yearbook or on the marquee or shouted over the loudspeakers. I wanted one thing, timing. A fund. Significant enough to transform the school's crumbling arts department. Music, drama, visual arts, all of it had been operating on duct tape and cement for the last decade. I'd seen it firsthand. Cellos held together with masking tape. Stage curtains with cigarette burns from the 90s. Teachers who spent half their salary restocking paintbrushes. So I offered a number. High six figures. Enough to buy new instruments, renovate the performance hall, offer 3 full scholarships to incoming students from underrepresented neighborhoods. I even threw in funds to digitize the library's archive. But only under one condition. My name stays buried until I say otherwise. Mr. Reed blinked. Most donors, they want visibility. I just smiled. I'll want something else. Later. He didn't ask what. Smart man. The paperwork was clean. Ironclad. Disbursement schedules, spending guidelines, name usage restrictions, all filed. All signed. The foundation, to its credit, held its end of the bargain. And while Karen was busy posting cocktail photos from some rented rooftop in Charleston, and Tyler was bragging to Rotary Club buddies about how he once almost bought the school's naming rights, I was already shaping the future they were too self-absorbed to notice. My daughter played on a violin I helped purchase. She danced under LED stage lights I had approved. She practiced in a studio I'd paid to soundproof. She didn't know. None of them did. At that year's holiday auction, when Tyler raised his paddle for a silent art auction and donated a measly $5,000, the crowd clapped like seals. Karen glowed like she'd won a tiara. Meanwhile, I was already 40 times deeper into the ledger, anonymous, unseen, and not once asked for thanks. Every week, I got the foundation's quiet updates via PDF. Phase 1, complete. Renovation photos attached. Phase 2, studio completed ahead of schedule. Phase 3, initial scholarship candidates interviewed. They listed me simply as donor 47B. I read every line like it was a poem. There was power in being invisible. No one to challenge. No one to thank. Just clean, surgical influence. Slow drip legacy, biding its time. And all the while, Tyler got applause for showing up. Let him. Because when graduation came, when the school reached the final page of its closing ceremony script, the last slot reserved for a special recognition, that was when the curtain I paid for would finally rise. And for once, the loudest room would go silent. Because what they mocked had built everything beneath their feet. Karen had always been loud when she felt safe. And Tyler made her feel invincible. Every week brought another filtered slice of their curated fairy tale, champagne brunches in Napa, sunset selfies on the bow of a rented yacht, blurry nightclub shots with captions like building empires with my king briefcase red heart. My daughter would repost them with heart emojis, hashtags, the whole digital theater of wealth. To the world, Tyler wasn't just a boyfriend. He was proof that Karen had leveled up. Escaped the beige world of middle-class Alan with his thrifted book collection and practical Volvo. Now she had a man who took helicopters to meetings and wore watches that screamed, "I'm not late, you are." What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that I'd seen Tyler's name before. Not on social media. In SEC filings. Because 3 years ago, before he ever swooped into our lives in that glossy Porsche, his startup, an app that overpromised AI-based home investment returns, tried to buy ad space from a tech partner of mine. I read the deck. It was fluff. Flashy, over-leveraged, and swimming in angel money from people who treated seed investing like blackjack. I passed on them. Instead, I bought into their competitor. Quietly, patiently. That company didn't promise to revolutionize real estate or disrupt generational wealth cycles. It just worked. And lately, it had started eating Tyler's market share like acid on velvet. But Karen didn't know any of this. She thought quarterly growth meant Instagram likes. So she flaunted him. At our daughter's school fundraiser, she told a table of parents, Tyler's planning an IPO next year. Things are really exploding. She said it with that glazed-over confidence of someone parroting phrases they don't understand. I sipped my coffee and smiled. Because I'd just seen a quarterly update from my own company's CEO. Notable increase in user conversion, especially among demographics previously held by competitor Nestcraft, led by Tyler Mendez. The kicker? Tyler had floated too much too fast. Took mezzanine loans to buy credibility. Leveraged personal equity to impress investors. His financials weren't so much a tower as they were Jenga with a cigarette lighter nearby. And still, Karen strutted like royalty through our daughter's campus. At one parent mixer, she pulled me aside with a condescending grin and said, "You know, Alan, not every man can handle seeing his replacement thrive." I raised my glass. Tell him to enjoy the altitude. Air's thin up there. She didn't catch the warning. Because Karen lived in surface reflections. Headlines. Tags. Bragging rights. She thought Tyler was her victory lap. But I knew the game better than both of them. While they posed under Italian pergolas and toasted to limitless futures, I made one quiet call to a former colleague, an investigative financial analyst. Just a catch-up chat. I let him know about a few expense line items in Tyler's company that didn't quite add up. No accusation. Just curiosity. Then I let gravity handle the rest. Because nothing crashes harder than fake altitude. Especially when you've built your identity on borrowed wings. The gala was held in a renovated glass atrium downtown, the kind of place with valet parking, six-figure light fixtures, and more exposed collarbones than a Versace runway. Karen arrived in a silk dress that probably cost more than my daughter's last semester. Tyler, naturally, was the centerpiece. He'd been invited to speak that night, a vision for disruption in wealth tech. His face was printed on the program next to phrases like serial entrepreneur and visionary thought leader. Karen shared a photo of them at the venue entrance, captioned, "Proud doesn't begin to cover it." #future forward. From the outside, they looked unstoppable. Front row seats. Flutes of Dom. Their names echoed in the crowd with that social clout cocktail of envy and forced admiration. What she didn't hear, what she wouldn't even have known to notice, was what came after the applause. The polite nods. The strained smiles. The murmurs at the open bar from the guys in slightly looser ties. Whispers about non-compliant disbursements and someone's burning equity like it's fireworks. Because Tyler's keynote was polished, sure. But it was all sizzle. No steak. He dropped AI buzzwords like confetti and made promises about decentralized property portfolios that left the actual VCs squinting into their bourbon. And me? I wasn't there. I was at home, reading the program online, feet up, glass of rye in hand. I already knew what was coming. You don't stay in logistics for 30 years without learning how to trace movement, not just of products, but of people, especially people trying to outrun their own paper trails. A week later, the article dropped. Quiet site, niche readership, but accurate. SEC reviewing discretionary spending at Nestcraft, executive travel, marketing expenses flagged. There wasn't a smoking gun yet, just smoke. But it was enough. Tyler's CFO issued a dry no comment. One investor pulled out. Another demanded a special audit. Karen didn't post that week. I printed the article, folded it, tucked it neatly into a drawer beside my daughter's first crayon drawing of our old house. One page next to another, one future beginning, one unraveling. Then I made a phone call. Not to gloat. Not to accelerate anything. Just to donate. I called the foundation that hosted the gala, the same one that printed Tyler's name in gold foil across their programs, and asked to make a modest contribution. "Oh, how would you like it listed?" In Tyler Mendez's name, I said, pausing just enough for it to register. "Please send the receipt to his office. He's very passionate about the cause." A beat of silence on the line. "Of course, sir. Tax receipts don't lie." especially when your financials are being combed through line by line. And when one lands on your desk that you didn't authorize, in the middle of a federal inquiry. Let's just say it raises questions. Questions Tyler didn't have clean answers to. Not with his house of borrowed money and shaky accounting. And Karen? She never asked about the receipt, but she did start showing up to fewer events after that. And when she did, she left Tyler at home. It wasn't a knockout punch. Not yet. But the ring was closing, and I had no intention of throwing haymakers. I was here to tighten the thread, inch by inch, until every corner of their little empire began to fray. Don't worry about rehearsal, Karen had texted. It's just for family walking with her. You're not needed. You're not needed. That was the line that finally made me stop mid-step in my garage, phone in hand, fingers cold even in the June heat. I stood there for a full minute, rereading those 4 words like they were written in fire. You're not needed. I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I simply closed the garage door, got in the car, and drove. They didn't expect me at the rehearsal. That much was clear. Karen's smug assumption, Tyler's ever-growing confidence, my daughter's silence. They'd all bought into the idea that I was now just background furniture. Quiet. Predictable. Declawed. But I showed up. I parked 2 blocks away and entered through the side lot like the maintenance staff. No tie. No name badge. Just a man who knew how to go unnoticed. The auditorium was buzzing with rehearsing seniors, clicking heels, nervous giggles, and stage managers barking orders. I stood in the back, in the shadows, and watched. She was beautiful, not just because of the gown or the way she carried herself, but because she looked like herself again. Vibrant, young, radiant in the way you only are once in life, when the world still feels like a starting line. And then I saw him walk up behind her. Tyler, all polished charm and manicured charisma. One hand on her shoulder like he'd earned it, like she was a portfolio. She turned to a friend and said it casually, like it was fact, not betrayal. He's more of a father figure than my real dad ever was. I didn't flinch, not on the outside. Inside, something folded neatly into ash. A soundless combustion. No drama, just erosion. I left before they saw me. I didn't need a confrontation. I needed clarity. And I had it now. That night, I poured myself a glass of water. Not scotch, not wine, just cold, clean water, and opened my laptop. Subject line, Commencement Edition Request. Body, Dear Principal Monroe, I would like to formally request 90 seconds to speak at the graduation ceremony. This is not a keynote, nor a disruption. Simply a brief message of thanks and acknowledgement to the class of 2024 before the final diploma is presented. I am one of the arts program donors and have supported your school's mission since 2022. Thank you for considering. Sincerely, Alan Wexler. I didn't wait more than 10 minutes. The reply was almost instantaneous. Mr. Wexler, yes, of course. We are grateful for your support. We'll slot you in just before the final diploma handoff. That was it. No flourish. No prep meeting. Just a quiet green light. And I sat there, rereading that reply like it was a contract signed in blood. They'd wanted me invisible. I was going to be unforgettable. Not by yelling. Not by fighting. By arriving. Exactly when they thought I wouldn't. Graduation morning broke humid and sharp, the kind of June day that made suits stick to your back and regret settle behind your collar. I tied my tie slowly, methodically, like a man preparing for something not quite a war but definitely not peace. I didn't wear anything flashy, just a navy suit I'd owned for years, shined shoes, the same watch my daughter gave me when she was 10. The inscription on the back said, "Best Dad Ever." She didn't remember giving it to me. I never stopped wearing it. I arrived early, sat in the 3rd row from the back, center aisle again, same seat as the rehearsal. The gym was already humming fanning programs, clicking heels on bleachers, someone's uncle arguing with a teenager over parking. The stage was freshly draped in school colors, podium polished, gold-accented folding chairs set up with military precision. Karen made an entrance, of course. She wore a cream dress that practically shouted, "I divorced well," her hand linked to Tyler's elbow like they were Hollywood royalty. Tyler was all gloss, suit tailored within an inch of its life, teeth camera ready, shaking hands with other parents like he'd funded the damn school himself. Every person they passed smiled, nodded, leaned in for a handshake. He was the main event. at least in their minds. I watched as he posed for a photo with my daughter and her principal. He gestured confidently, one hand behind her back, the other flashing that same overcompensating Rolex I'd seen in 20 of Karen's vacation posts. Parents whispered. Someone asked if he was a guest speaker. Karen beamed like she'd just been crowned something. They never noticed me. I didn't wave, didn't stand, didn't even blink. Just sat quietly, waiting. Then came the ceremony. The slow, inevitable march of names, applause, photos, the principal pausing every 10 students for a joke no one laughed at but everyone politely endured. And then it came. Just before the final honor roll announcement, the principal stepped forward and tapped the microphone. We'd like to take a moment before presenting our final diploma to acknowledge someone who made this year's artistic growth possible. Karen turned to Tyler, smirking like she was bracing for a humble brag on his behalf. Tyler straightened his jacket, adjusted his watch. The principal continued, eyes scanning the crowd. Please welcome Mr. Alan Wexler. It was so quiet you could have heard a seatbelt click. Karen blinked, confused. Tyler's mouth twitched in a way that wasn't a smile. And I stood. Simple suit. Clean shoes. Nothing special until I started walking. Every head turned. Phones rose. Parents craned. Karen half rose from her seat like she thought I was mistaken. But the principal extended his hand. Firm. Grateful. I stepped behind the podium, looked out over a sea of faces that had spent the last year forgetting I existed. And then I began. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just present, the one thing they never expected me to be. I adjusted the mic gently. No tapping. No clearing of the throat. Just a calm breath and a voice even I hadn't heard in a while, measured, steady, full. Thank you, Principal Monroe. I promised not to take more than a minute. I scanned the room once. Eyes everywhere. Curious. Puzzled. Karen froze in mid-expression, lips slightly parted, still processing the fact that I hadn't just shown up. I belonged here. Tyler sat rigid beside her, arms crossed, suddenly very small in a chair that moments ago felt like a throne. I kept my gaze moving until it landed on my daughter. She looked confused. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Just confused. Like a movie she thought she'd already seen had taken a turn. I smiled small, real, and began. I've been many things in my life. A business owner. A quiet man. A father, though sometimes from too far back in the crowd. But most of all, I've been a believer. A believer in what can be built slowly. Quietly. Brick by brick. Note by note. Brushstroke by brushstroke. A murmur rippled. Phones dropped a few inches. People began to listen. When I first walked through the Mitchell Theater 2 years ago, the ceiling laked. The lights flickered. The students, brilliant, imaginative kids, rehearsed under conditions no stage deserved. That day, I decided to do something about it. Not loudly. Not with a press release. I turned slightly and pointed to the gleaming performance hall, visible through the glass-paneled gym doors. Renovated. Modern. Alive with color. That renovation, those instruments, the new studio, the scholarships, were all made possible through a fund I started, the Mitchell Arts Fund. I paused, then said it clean, simple, and sharp. A donation I made, in silence. Gasps. You could hear them. A few parents turned to each other. Karen's face lost every trace of amusement. Tyler's jaw twitched. I looked at my daughter. She didn't blink. I know I've been called just Dad. And that's okay. Because Dad is a title I never needed applause for. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's worth reminding people that quiet doesn't mean absent. That legacy isn't always loud. Then I stepped aside and nodded toward the AV booth in the back. The gym lights dimmed. A screen descended. And on it, a photo montage before and afters of the arts program, student testimonials, the new scholarship recipients smiling wide. At the end, the final slide, an image of the new bronze plaque mounted just outside the theater. The Mitchell Arts Fund, made possible by a gift from Alan Wexler. Applause didn't erupt. It grew, like a wave swelling slowly, unsure at first, then fully formed. The kind you feel in your spine before it hits your ears. I looked at my daughter again. She stood. She didn't clap. She didn't smile. She just stared, locked in place, eyes glassy, bottom lip slightly trembling. And I thought, that's it. That's the moment she sees me again. I stepped off stage without another word. Karen didn't move. Tyler was scrolling his phone like a man hoping bad news hadn't gone viral. And me? I kept walking, because I'd already said everything I needed to. When the final name was called and caps began to fly, most parents surged toward the stage like a wave of perfume and camera flashes. Laughter, crying, flowers everywhere. It should have been chaos. But not around them. Karen didn't stand. She didn't reach for her phone or Tyler's hand. She sat perfectly still, like if she didn't move, maybe no one would notice how badly she'd misread the entire script. Tyler, usually the loudest man in any room, had gone pale. No arm slung confidently around anyone's shoulder now. No Rolex glinting in the sun. Just two people who had spent the last year living at full volume, suddenly rendered mute by one quiet sentence. A donation I made in silence. And that plaque, that damn plaque, had done more damage than any confrontation could have. It said, "You weren't just wrong. You were irrelevant." I wasn't watching them. Not directly. But I saw the way people glanced over. Sharp, sideways looks that carried meaning. The principal, the PTA head, even some of the faculty who had once walked past me like I was just another divorced dad with a checkbook. They were nodding now. With respect. Recognition. Karen looked like she was shrinking. Not just socially, physically. Her back hunched slightly. Her arms stayed folded. Her posture no longer screamed, "First wife of a CEO." It whispered, "Something's not right." And then she saw what really killed her. Our daughter, standing 20 feet away, staring at me. She hadn't cheered during the applause. She hadn't hugged anyone. Just stood there, frozen, watching me as if trying to reconcile two worlds. The man who sent quiet birthday texts and showed up at recitals like a ghost, and the man who'd just rewritten the ending of her story. When she finally walked toward me, she moved slowly, purposefully. The crowd parted. Karen called her name once, soft, hopeful. Our daughter didn't even turn her head. She stopped a few feet in front of me. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry. It was uncertain, like she was afraid of the answer. I waited a beat. "Because I didn't want you to hear it," I said quietly. "I needed you to see it." She didn't say anything else. Just stepped forward and hugged me. No hesitation, no performance. Not a tap-tap hug. Not a shoulder bump. A full, real hug. One she didn't let go of for a long time. And I held on. Because underneath the weight of everything, years of being sidelined, minimized, stripped down to nothing but a name on tuition checks, this was the first time I felt seen. Not respected. Not thanked. Seen. Karen stood nearby. Alone. Watching. Clutching a gift bag she never got the chance to give. No one called for her. No one took her picture. Her audience had left. Her kingdom, dismantled by a man who never raised his voice. She turned and walked to the parking lot, heels clicking too loudly in the quiet that had followed. And as my daughter pulled back from the hug, eyes glassy but smiling now, I realized something simple and brutal. A man doesn't need revenge when he has presence. And I had never stood taller. A week after the ceremony, while Karen was waiting for her Sunday brunch to be served on the rooftop of yet another overpriced restaurant she thought meant something, the envelope arrived. Hand-delivered. No return address. No flourish. Just her name, typed cleanly in the center. She opened it like she was bracing for a subpoena. Inside, two things. First, a letter from the trustee's office, confirming the establishment and immediate transfer of a college trust in our daughter's name. Fully funded. Irrevocable. Covering not just tuition, but housing, books, study abroad, everything. Second, a handwritten note. One line. Sometimes, the quiet ones leave the deepest echoes. That was it. No signature. No phone number. No plea for thanks or recognition. She stared at it for a long time. Not because she didn't understand it, but because she did. Because she knew it was over. Not the marriage. That had ended years ago. Not the fight. There never really was one. But the narrative she'd worked so hard to sculpt. The image of Alan as the harmless ex, the outdated man trailing behind their fast new life, had shattered. And what replaced it? A daughter who no longer reposted Karen's power couple photos. A Tyler who now answered calls with "I'll call you back," and never did. An inbox full of missed invitations, fundraisers, parent mixers, donor circles, all gently excluding her now that her proximity to influence had changed zip codes. She tried calling me. Once, then twice, then 5 more times. I watched each call light up my phone like a dying flare in the dark. I never picked up. I wasn't angry. I simply didn't have anything else to say. That trust? It wasn't charity. It was clarity. A line in the sand written in ink and legal language that said, "She matters. You don't get to curate me out of her story anymore." A month later, someone forwarded me a picture from the school's social media account. My daughter, standing in the newly renovated theater lobby, smiling as she handed out programs to incoming freshmen during orientation week. No filters, no hashtags, just her, present, proud, part of something. That was when I knew. It had worked. Not the money, not the speech, the reminder, the reset, the quiet return of a truth they'd tried to erase. And Karen? Every time someone brings up graduation, whether it's a passing mention at a dinner party, a family member asking for pictures, or a student thanking her daughter for the scholarship that bears my name, her smile falters. Just slightly. The mask slips. Because that day didn't just belong to our daughter. It was the day Karen realized she'd bet on polish, not substance. She chose noise. I chose legacy. And legacy echoes longer. She's right, you know, her brother chuckled, chewing loudly through a mouthful of prime rib. All those degrees and he's still the guy they call when the printer stops working. The table erupted. Not the kind of laugh you hear at a good joke. No. This was the laugh you get when people aren't laughing with you. They're laughing at you. I didn't say a word. I had just handed her father a bottle of Napa Valley Red, a 2012 vintage he used to talk about like it was holy water. He accepted it with a fake smile, already swirling the Merlot in his glass like it had disappointed him. He hadn't even offered me a seat before launching into his interrogation. So, still doing IT stuff? Financial systems, right? He said it the way someone might say mold cleanup. Like it was unfortunate but necessary. I nodded once. Systems architecture for pension platforms. Integration security. Mostly back-end infrastructure. Her uncle leaned forward like he'd just spotted a menu item he couldn't pronounce. But not real finance though, huh? Before I could respond, she cut in. Oh no, don't ask him about actual investing. He's great with wires and cables, but if you want to make money, maybe ask someone who's been in the market longer than Google's been a company. They laughed again. This time, she laughed hardest. She didn't even look at me when she said it. Just raised her glass and took a sip, as if dismissing me from my own biography. I looked around the room. Polished marble countertops. A chandelier above the dining table her father had imported from Italy. 2 of her cousins were home from college, both clearly taught early that I was beneath the family pecking order. They watched me the way zoo visitors look at the animal that's not moving. Curiously. Pityingly. I'd come straight from work. Still in my wrinkled shirt, tie slightly crooked, hair damp from the drizzle outside. She knew I didn't have time to change. Knew I came anyway because I respected her father. Because I thought maybe, just maybe, we'd grown past this. But apparently, I was still the family pet. Her father lifted his glass toward me. To the digital plumber, he said with a wink, "May our networks never crash." I raised my glass, too. Not because I felt like toasting, but because I wanted to mark this moment, burn it into my memory. The moment I realized the room didn't see me as one of them. Not even her. Especially not her. She caught my eye across the table. There was no apology in her face. No remorse. Just that smug, amused little curl in the corner of her lips, the one she usually wore when she beat me at board games or caught me misplacing my keys. But this time, it felt colder. Crueler. I took a sip of wine. I smiled. And in that silence that followed, somewhere between the silverware clinks and another uncle launching into a story about market arbitrage, I made a decision. One I wouldn't have make. Because they didn't know something. Something small. Insignificant to them. Laughable. Maybe. All right, fellas, quick break. We're shooting for 10K subscribers. If you're enjoying these gripping tales of betrayal, hit that subscribe button, and let's get back to the story. They didn't know he had come to me 3 months ago. Her father. Asking about diversifying risk. Asking for help accessing the portfolio he'd set up years ago. He wanted to move the fund somewhere with better growth, outside regulation. He wanted an edge, and I gave him the technical tools to do it. A courtesy. A favor. And that courtesy had left a door wide open. When I had the keys to, that door had sat in my mind, untouched, like a locked cabinet in a quiet room. But as they laughed, the lock began to click. I didn't need their respect, but I would make sure they never forgot the cost of mocking the quiet one in the room. That night, she didn't even wait for me to change clothes before starting in. "Oh, come on. Really? You're mad about that," she said from the bathroom, wiping off her makeup like it was just another Tuesday. "It was a joke. You've got to stop being so damn sensitive." I stood in the doorway, still holding the tie she used to say made me look mature. Now it just felt like a noose I'd voluntarily tightened. "I didn't say anything," I replied, voice flat. "Exactly. That's the problem," she shot back. "You sulk like a child." "Jesus, it was my dad. You want me to correct him? He pays for half our vacations." I didn't answer. I just walked out of the room and grabbed a blanket from the hall closet. I've slept on couches before, airports, data centers, server rooms with humming fans for lullabies. But this one was different. This one came with floral throw pillows that still smelled like her hair. I lay down, staring at the ceiling fan, counting rotations, listening to the wind tap against the window pane. A rhythm formed, not soothing, strategic. My brain doesn't do silence. Not really. It replaces quiet with probability. Scans memory like a server log. That night, it found something. A folder. No, the folder. 3 months ago, her father came to me during a backyard barbecue. Burgers sizzling, grandkids chasing a frisbee, him swirling a glass of scotch like it held state secrets. "Hey," he said, pulling me aside. "Need a favor?" Small one. He'd asked me to help him navigate an offshore portfolio interface, some new digital dashboard his guy in Nassau had set up. He'd said it was temporary, just until the new guy got the hang of it. "You're the only one I trust not to screw it up," he'd said, chuckling like I was a clever dog who knew a few neat tricks. I'd helped him. Set up dual authentication. Streamlined the encryption handshake. Even left a copy of the config key tucked away for emergencies. That key was still saved. In a zip archive. In a folder labeled innocuously as Q4 server migration prep. Buried in my cloud. And tonight, after she rolled over in our bed and started snoring by 11:06 like nothing had happened, I opened my laptop. Not to work. Not even to rage. To study. I opened the archive. There it was. Asset flow history, account structures, hedge positions. The shell fund in question? Anchored by a high-yield vehicle with a soft belly. Vulnerable to market panic. He'd taken on risk, a lot of risk, because some greasy ex-hedge fund parasite promised better returns than a traditional annuity. But it wasn't the numbers that caught my eye. It was the exposure. One whisper. One wrong move. One line in the wrong inbox, and the whole house of cards starts to vibrate. I stared at the ceiling again. Her laughter still echoed. Not the laughter of someone telling a joke. The laughter of someone who meant it. Someone who wanted others to know she'd married down. Someone who liked being the clever one in the room, until the room cleared out. By 3:14 a.m., I had everything copied to a flash drive. By 3:22, I had a draft email in my unsent folder addressed to a friend of mine at the SEC. Subject line. Off the record, need your eyes on something. I didn't send it. Not yet. I just labeled the folder. For when she laughs again. Wednesday, 5:46 a.m. I hadn't slept. Didn't need to. My brain had already run every scenario twice. I brewed coffee I didn't taste, stood in the kitchen barefoot while the dog snored on his cushion, and stared at the glowing screen like it was whispering something I couldn't unhear. She was still asleep upstairs. Or pretending to be. Hard to tell anymore. I logged in using the credentials I'd stored away during that favor her father asked for last summer. Two-factor still pointed to his backup burner phone, the one he used when he didn't want his primary financial advisor knowing he was playing roulette offshore. I was in. The pension portfolio, such as it was, had been nestled into a shell fund registered in St. Kitts. Class B shares, denominated in euros, tied into a composite bond strategy hedged against Southeast Asian agriculture futures. It sounded sophisticated. It was trash. But to an aging man desperate to outperform the market, it probably looked like salvation. And that's the thing about desperation, it makes people believe in mirages. Her father, ever the self-declared alpha, didn't want fixed returns. I beat inflation in the 80s when Greenspan sneezed and the markets blinked, he once bragged. You think I'm scared of a little volatility? Apparently not. But the people he entrusted his nest egg to? They were playing with fire, and the kindling was dry. The primary asset, Fund CIX, was propped up by a boutique firm whose financials hadn't been audited in 3 years. A familiar name caught my eye, Caldor Advisory Group. I hadn't heard that name since the Eastwood merger fallout in 2019, when I testified, off record, about irregular asset packaging during a private hearing. I still had the contact. Rebecca Lynn, former compliance officer, now freelance consultant in D.C. I tapped out the message with one hand, coffee in the other. Becca, hypothetical for you. Let's say someone uncovers unregulated exposure tied to pension contributions via Caldor shell funds, anchored in unsecured foreign bond packages. If that info landed in the wrong inbox, what kind of panic are we talking? She replied in 10 minutes. Off the record? Fireworks. Media would jump. Funds like that don't survive the words regulatory probe. It would spook investors. Liquidity freeze. Maybe worse. Why? What did you find? I didn't answer. Just closed the thread and stared at the blinking cursor like it was waiting for my permission to start the avalanche. Because now I knew. This wasn't just a theory. It was a fuse. All I had to do was strike the match. Her father had anchored the entire fund's worth into this garbage, believing he was outsmarting the market, and outsmarting me, frankly. Probably chuckled to himself thinking about how the glorified IT guy wouldn't understand how real money moves. But systems are systems. I don't need to be a trader to know what happens when the wrong string gets tugged. And this one? This one was frayed. Dry. Sitting in a pile of oil-soaked rags. One article. One whisper to a journalist. One quiet email to a friend with access to a regulatory desk, and pop. Not a bang. Not an explosion. A slow collapse. The kind that starts quietly until it swallows everything. I minimized the screen, leaned back, and looked out the window. Dawn was breaking. My street looked like any other, quiet, still, almost peaceful. But something had shifted. Not out there. In me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not the sharp kind. I was cold. Focused. Calm. The way you get right before pulling a trigger. By Thursday, she'd switched tones like someone flipping a light switch. Babe, I was thinking, maybe we need a break. Somewhere warm. You've been so tense lately. Her voice had that syrupy tone she reserved for when she wanted something. Like when she crashed the car and blamed the rain, or when her credit card got declined at Nordstrom and she called me mid-meeting to fix it urgently. I looked up from my laptop and nodded, just enough to be polite. She stood in the doorway, holding 2 mugs, hers with oat milk and cinnamon, mine black and forgotten. You could use some sun. We both could. A week ago, she'd laughed at me in front of a room full of men who still wore cufflinks and thought that made them better than plumbers. And now, suddenly, she wants to fly somewhere just us. I accepted the coffee and said nothing. Silence is often mistaken for compliance. That's the advantage. But while she booked flights and browsed resorts on her tablet, I was elsewhere, back inside the pension structure, tracking the fund's exposure in real time. Her father had rebalanced last quarter into something called Agrivoltaic Commodities Asia-Pacific Growth Trust. Translation? He was gambling on a hybrid farming solar initiative in rural Malaysia run by a firm that had recently been flagged by 2 watchdogs for cooking their quarterly statements. They were weeks away from announcing new returns. And if they missed projections, even by a whisper, especially after the Caldor probe, a panic sell would be instant. It was like watching a plane fly with one engine on fire and the pilot too proud to admit he smelled smoke. At 3:43 p.m. that day, I began writing an email. Not to the SEC this time. No, too formal, too slow. This one was for someone I'd met years ago during a systems audit at a media firm. Her name was Kendra, investigative financial reporter. Fearless, always one bad quarter away from exposing another Enron. She owed me. After I found the backdoor data feed in a hedge fund CMS and helped her break a story that made her career. Subject line: unregulated exposure, possible Caldor link. I drafted everything. Bullet points. A paper trail. Links. Screen grabs. Red flags in digestible format. Every detail her editors would drool over. I stopped just before attaching the fun chart. Because I wasn't ready. Not yet. I wanted her to laugh again first. I wanted her to feel so comfortable, so smug, that the fall would dislocate her reality. So instead of sending it, I saved the draft in a subfolder named Travel Itinerary. I encrypted it, then closed the laptop and walked into the living room, where she was curled on the couch in her yoga pants and a new top I hadn't seen before. She patted the cushion beside her. "Come sit." I ordered Thai. I sat, ate 2 bites, smiled. "Thanks," I said, sipping the wine she poured. Because in her mind, everything was fine now. She thought all I needed was a little affection, a little pad thai and Sauvignon Blanc, and all would be forgiven. But beneath the blanket she draped over my lap, my phone buzzed once. A reply from Kendra. "Holy shit. This is big. Want me to verify it quietly? Can hold the story until you say go." I tapped keep unread. She'd given me the matches. Now all I had to do was wait for the wind to change. And it would. It was her mother's birthday this time. A quiet dinner at the country club, just family, though the word family in their world seemed to mean anyone with a tailored blazer and a LinkedIn premium account. I came straight from a late meeting, still in my badge and company-issued coat. No time to shave. No one said hello when I arrived. Not even her. She barely looked up from her seat, sipping a martini and already mid-conversation with her cousin Lauren about exit options and equity ceilings. Whatever corporate nonsense gave them purpose that week. I sat down quietly. Her brother leaned across the table, already 2 glasses in. "So, still solving printer problems?" A few chuckles. I forced a polite smile. But then she followed it. "Honestly, he makes Excel spreadsheets look exciting." Her cousin burst out laughing. Even her mother, sweet, fragile, medically sedated, let out a chuckle. I looked at her then. Right at her. She didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Didn't even smirk. She just went back to her drink. In that moment, I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. Not hurt. Not jealousy. Not pride. Just silence. The kind that fills the room right before an electrical surge. The kind of silence that makes you realize you've already made a decision, long before your body agrees to it. After dessert, she leaned in and whispered in my ear, like she was doing me some kind of favor. "Thanks for coming, babe. Mom appreciated it." I stood, kissed her on the temple out of habit, and left. I didn't go home. Instead, I booked a hotel 2 miles from our house. Nothing fancy, just clean sheets, silence, and Wi-Fi. At 11:08 p.m., I pulled up the draft email to Kendra. It was all still there. Verified numbers, regulatory breadcrumbs, screenshots, file names, a discrete package of truth. But tonight, I did one thing more. I added a name to the CC line, her father. Not out of cruelty, out of clarity. Because if I was going to light the match, I wanted him to see the fuse burning. I wanted him to sit at his massive oak desk, reading an email not meant for him, but very much about him. I wanted him to feel what I felt when he raised that glass and toasted the digital plumber. I stared at that screen until my eyes burned. My finger hovered over send, but I didn't click it. Not yet. Instead, I leaned back, cracked open the minibar whiskey, and turned off my phone. I needed the silence. One last night to confirm what I already knew in my bones. This wasn't revenge anymore. It was gravity, and once it started falling, there would be no stopping it. 6:41 a.m. The sky outside the hotel window was gray. That kind of dull, pre-storm sky that made you think the sun had just quit for the day before it even started. I sat at the small desk with my laptop open, one hand on the keyboard, the other gripping the paper cup of burnt hotel coffee. The email was still open. I didn't read it again. I just hovered over the mouse and clicked send. It took less than a second. A quiet click. No dramatic music. No thunder. Just one line at the bottom of the screen. Message sent. I closed the laptop. Exhaled. Not like a man who'd just done something violent. More like someone who'd finally put a screaming animal out of its misery. Then I waited. By 8:03, Kendra had replied, "Holy hell. Running it. You'll want to keep an eye on BFI News at 10. Buckle up." At 9:12, her father was on CNBC. Not as a guest. As a punchline. A scrolling banner ran beneath the talking heads like a slow knife. Breaking. Caldor-linked agrivoltaic trust under federal inquiry. pension-backed assets frozen amid fraud concerns. At 9:58, my phone lit up with a text from a former colleague. Yo, isn't that your FIL's fund getting torched right now? Wild timing. At 10:06, another buzz. Dad, WTF is this? Did you do something? I didn't reply. Not to him. That would have felt like gloating. I just turned on the hotel TV, muted the volume, and watched the chaos spread like spilled oil on tile. By 10:27, the fund's site had been pulled offline due to system maintenance, which was code for we're hemorrhaging investor trust and trying not to drown. At 10:49, her father's voicemail box was full. At 11:12, the investment firm issued a public statement assuring clients their funds were secure, which is exactly the kind of sentence that makes everyone pull their funds. At 11:30, trading on 3 of their subholdings was halted. At 11:41, Kendra's article dropped. The offshore gamble that torched 1,000 retirements. Her father's name wasn't in the article, but every fund he touched was. He wouldn't be the headline, but he'd be collateral damage. And me? I was just a ghost. A digital shadow in a spreadsheet he couldn't understand. At 12:03 p.m., my phone buzzed again. Her. Hey babe, everything okay? Coming home for dinner tonight? I stared at the message for a long moment. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. Then, thinking pasta maybe. Let me know. I typed back 2 words. Might be late. And hit send. The sun was already setting when she pulled into her parents' driveway, heels clicking fast across the pavers, phone still in her hand. 2 missed calls from her father, 1 from her brother, 1 from a blocked number she didn't dare answer. She hadn't yet connected the dots. Not fully. But something was wrong. The house was unusually quiet, except for the muffled shouting coming from her father's study, the one room in the house she used to call the Vatican, because it was sacred ground. You didn't enter without being summoned. You didn't sit in his chair. And you never questioned what he said inside those walls. But tonight, the door was wide open. He stood behind his desk, tie half removed, collar damp with sweat, slamming papers onto the leather blotter. Her mother hovered by the doorframe like a ghost trying not to be seen. Where is he? He barked the moment she stepped in. Who? She asked, genuinely confused. Your husband. The goddamn janitor with a badge. You gave him access to my accounts? Her breath caught. What? I know. I didn't give him anything. He helped me set up your portfolio viewer a while back. That's all. Her father's face twisted like he'd just tasted blood. You told him the account names. The credentials. You sat next to him while he set up my access. Christ, he set up my 2-factor authentication. It was just tech help, she snapped, her voice cracking. You said he was safe. He was part of the family. He pointed at the screen behind him. A CNBC graph was still glowing downward red line like a cardiac arrest monitor. 40%. 40% overnight. I don't understand, she muttered. No, you don't, he roared. My retirement. Your mother's health account. My brokerage bridge. All of it was tied to that position. You thought it was a goddamn joke letting him into my systems? Did you ever once stop to think that maybe, just maybe, he knew what he was looking at? She stood frozen. He was shaking now, not out of rage anymore, but fear. She'd never seen her father afraid. He was the man who negotiated his own surgeries, the man who told cardiologists to skip the upsell on stents. And now he looked like a drowning man pointing fingers. You married the guy who burned me, he said quietly. And then you handed him the matches. Her mother turned her face away, like she couldn't bear to watch. Her father's voice dropped to a low, bitter tone. I told you not to mock him. I told you years ago he wasn't loud, but he listened. He wouldn't, she began, but even as she said it, the words rang hollow, because deep down, some part of her knew. The silence, the coldness, the fact he didn't even fight back at that dinner, the way he left the house and never came home, the unread texts, the lack of screaming. It all made a cruel kind of sense now. She stepped back from the study. Her phone was slick in her hand as she dialed his number. Once. Voicemail. Twice. Voicemail. Text, please call me. What's happening? What did you do? No reply. No read receipts. No lifeline. Her father stood there, shaking his head. Don't come back here, he said, almost whispering. Dada, you did this. She turned away. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have in late spring. Her car felt like a coffin. Her phone, A useless brick. She tried again. Voicemail. And somewhere in a forgotten part of her memory, she heard him laughing politely at that dinner. She laughed too. Now no one was laughing. By morning, the cracks were spreading faster than she could chase them. She woke up in the empty house, his side of the bed cold, untouched. She reached for her phone with fingers still trembling from the night before. 10 missed calls. Her brother. Her father again. Even Lauren, the cousin who never called unless someone died. She sat up slowly, trying to replay everything. There had to be some misunderstanding. Some ridiculous chain of events that didn't involve him. He was boring, safe, predictable. He made oatmeal in silence. He read white papers for fun. He bought the same brand of socks for 15 years. He wasn't capable of. She opened her laptop. His login? Disabled. She called the bank, her father's bank, the one she once helped him set up dual access to when her mother had surgery. Security hold. She called another, their bank. Her name was still on the checking account. Ma'am, we've been asked not to discuss this account with you until the matter is resolved through legal counsel. What matter? She snapped. I'm sorry, ma'am. That's all I'm authorized to say. She hung up before the polite apology finished. Her pulse climbed. She called his office. Hi, this is Rebecca. I'm looking for my husband. He works in a... Sorry, he's out today. Actually, a pause, then some rustling. Looks like his resignation came through this morning. Left a forwarding contact for legal, nothing else. She sat at the kitchen island staring at the granite, her hands clenched into pale fists. Something inside her, something cold and awful, began crawling upward from her stomach. She opened the shared cloud drive. Gone. Wiped clean. She called his phone again. Straight to voicemail. This wasn't an argument. This wasn't a spat. This was strategic. She walked room to room like a stranger in her own house, looking for clues. Something. Anything. That's when she saw it. A small brown padded envelope sitting neatly on the hallway table. No name. No address. Just there. Waiting. She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside, 3 sheets of paper. Printed screenshots. One of a Caldor investment screen. Her father's portfolio balance, now at less than half. One of the email chain to the journalist. Timestamped. Dated. And the last one? A screen grab of the dinner invite calendar from 3 months ago, highlighted with a note next to it in red font. The night you called me a glorified tech guy. Taped to the final page was a yellow post-it note. 5 words. Just a joke, right? The wall swam. She grabbed the edge of the counter to keep from dropping. She ran to her room, yanked open the dresser, and saw it, his side, empty. His drawer, stripped bare. Only a USB stick left behind, snapped in half and placed neatly on top of her favorite scarf. The one he used to say made her look untouchable. Now she felt unreachable. She tried calling one more time. Voicemail. She opened their wedding photo album in some futile, desperate gesture and realized the cover was loose. Inside, tucked behind their smiling photo in Maui, was a folded legal document. Petition for separation. Filed. Dated. Signed. She slumped to the floor, still clutching the screenshots like they could explain this to her better than her husband ever had. But he had explained it. Just not with words. Just with silence. And precision. And 5 quiet words she used to toss around like confetti. Now they were a blade pressed against her throat. Just a joke, right? The silence from her family wasn't sudden, it was surgical. It began with a text from her younger brother. Don't contact me. You made this mess. Then her father. A letter, delivered by courier. No handwritten note. No greeting. Just a notarized revocation of her access to the family trust and a single line at the bottom. Effective immediately, you are no longer considered a financial beneficiary or decision maker. She stared at it for hours, numb, rereading it like it would rearrange itself into mercy. But it stayed the same, final, cold, sterile. She drove to her parents' house 2 days later. The gates didn't open. She buzzed. Nothing. She called her mother's cell. It rang twice then. We're not getting involved anymore. Your father can't even look at the television without his hands shaking. You handed him the rope, Rebecca, and you laughed while he tied it. There was a pause. Then, softer. We told you to stop mocking him. You mocked your own anchor. Click. And that was it. No shouting. No reconciliation arc. Just a door that had been quietly closed, and welded shut. Back home, she tried to rally. She put on the navy blazer, the one she always said made her look decisive, and marched into work like she still belonged there. She'd built a reputation at that private equity firm over the last 5 years, until the last 72 hours unraveled that thread. Her boss didn't even pretend to be surprised when he called her into his office. He slid a manila folder across the desk. "I've been asked to let you go." "Why?" she asked, voice shaking. "Because we were exposed. That agrivoltaic trust you recommended as next-gen last quarter? Our exposure was small, but our clients don't like coincidences." "I didn't know." "But you were married to the man who pulled the pin, and you didn't disclose your conflict of interest." Her mouth opened, then shut again. There was no defense that didn't make her look either criminal or colossally naive. The walk back to her desk felt like a funeral march. Her assistant wouldn't even meet her eye. By that evening, she was alone in the kitchen, drinking wine she didn't remember opening. Her phone buzzed again, another number she didn't recognize. She answered, desperate for something anyone. "Mrs. Livingston?" the voice said. "This is a courtesy call from Carrington Legal. You've been named in a civil inquiry involving multiple pension investors connected to the Caldor Group." Her hand went limp. The phone hit the tile with a dull clatter. She didn't pick it up. She didn't move. She just sat there at the island in silence, like she had that night after the dinner party, when she laughed too loud, said too much, and thought she had married below her. Turns out, she just underestimated him. There were no charges. No court case. No crime. Just a meticulously orchestrated collapse of trust. No fingerprints. Just pressure. A quiet little man with a quiet little job and a brain sharp enough to calculate her entire world's softest point and crack it with one tap. She opened her laptop, tried logging into the shared retirement dashboard. Access denied. She closed it again. Somewhere, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. And across town, in a hotel room or a new apartment she'd never seen, her husband, the man she belittled in front of dinner guests, wasn't gloating. He didn't have to. He'd already won. And the wreckage? She was still crawling through it. Alone. The ballroom buzzed with the sterile hum of wealth. Tailored suits, clinking glasses, scripted applause. It was a finance leadership conference, the kind her father used to dominate, her brothers used to name drop, and she used to coast through like she belonged on the cover of a lifestyle magazine. Smart women, smarter marriages. She wasn't invited. She showed up because an old college friend gave her a badge someone else hadn't claimed. The lanyard felt like a leash. She hovered at the back, by the free espresso cart, sunglasses still on. Hair pinned up, makeup flawless, but her hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. Then she heard the name. Not his full one. Just the brand, Kettlebridge Risk Solutions. "Please welcome our next speaker, founder and managing director." He walked out like he'd done it 1,000 times. Crisp gray suit. No tie. Sleeves rolled once. He looked taller. Maybe it was the posture. Maybe it was the silence. The applause was sharp and real. She hadn't heard applause like that in months. No one around her knew her connection to him. No one looked her way. She was invisible, again. He spoke for 15 minutes. Not about vengeance. Not about pension funds. Just about risk. Measured language. Clean slides. A few dry jokes. One line made her stomach flip. Systems don't fail because of chaos. They fail because of arrogance. Someone always believes they're untouchable. The audience laughed. She didn't. When he stepped down, people lined up to shake his hand. A hedge fund CEO. A compliance board VP. The very people who used to roll their eyes when she mentioned the IT guy. She slipped through the crowd like a ghost. And then he passed her. Didn't break stride. Didn't look at her. Didn't hesitate. His eyes were forward, focused. But she saw it. In the breast pocket of his jacket, a small silver USB drive. The same one she used to see on his desk late at night, when he thought she wasn't paying attention. The one she now knew held everything. Every email, every file, every time-stamped breadcrumb that could prove beyond doubt that her downfall wasn't chance. But he never leaked it. He never needed to. He'd let them decide who to blame. And they had. Her father hadn't spoken to her since that night in the study. Her brothers still posted about toxic trust and never outsourced loyalty without tagging her. Her mother, when they crossed paths at a grocery store, turned down an aisle like she'd seen a ghost. The narrative had solidified. She let him in. She mocked him. She trusted the wrong man for the wrong reasons. And he'd vanished like smoke and reappeared reborn. Not loud, not triumphant, just done. At the exit, she paused, looked back one last time. He was already gone. A new speaker took the stage. Life moved on, but in her purse was a folded copy of the letter she'd never sent. An apology, a confession, a plea to meet for coffee. She thought about mailing it, but he didn't live there anymore. He lived in the silence, and that silence had won.